As the Hollywood cliche goes, post-coital, some of us sit back against the headboard, proud of our accomplishment at gratifying our lover, spouse, or one-night stand, and then light up a cigarette. How was it for you? Good enough, you surmise, as you take a well-earned drag? Or are you the kind of person to roll over in an instant, perhaps leaving your bedfellow exasperated and hardly ready to catch some Z's? Or perhaps you spare just a moment reposing, and then compose yourself and start again. Do you cuddle up, have a chat, talk about deep things, or even request a favor of your lover? According to research, these are all common. But what happens to our bodies during and after sex? That's what we'll find out today. In this episode of the Infographic Show, what happens to your body while you are having sex? Today we'll talk about what happens to both men and women having heterosexual sex, and when we say sex, we mean intercourse, lovemaking, copulation, fornication, or as the Brits say, having it off. So, let's start with the man. What happens to him? At some point during sex, men reach a point of no return. This is sometimes called ejaculatory inevitability. Pulse rate and blood pressure rise, the sperm leaves him, and his penis has contractions. Now he can return to resting and let his body calm down, which apparently happens faster for men than women. The penis becomes flaccid, and most men will have to wait some time before they can go at it again, but it all depends on age, fitness, and of course the urge to return to the hearth of passion. Some guys at this point will just want to go to sleep. Is this plain rude, or is it a biological necessity? Well, listen up, disgruntled women. Science says it's natural for men to want to sleep, and for various reasons. Notwithstanding the obvious, in that it's often nighttime and tiredness might be normal, another reason is because upon reaching orgasm, men release lots of pent-up anxiety. So do women, and they might feel tired too, but it seems men sleep more after sex according to research. Another thing is brain chemistry. All these chemicals spill out in the brain when men ejaculate, including serotonin, oxytocin, norepinephrine, vasopressin, and nitric oxide. Some of these chemicals are related to de-stressing and the readiness to sleep. This can lead to that feeling of, phew, and then men want to relax just as they would after any strenuous exercise. It's kind of like getting a hit of morphine, and apparently that hit is much stronger when having sex than when masturbating. One doctor puts it like this when talking about the release of chemicals. They give you a very relaxed feeling, slow down your brainwaves and cerebral functioning, and make you feel pleasantly tired. But it's thought the hormone that is released called prolactin is the main reason men want to sleep. It gives you satisfaction, and the less of it you have, the more likely you will go for round 2 quicker. Really satisfied men may just turn over and start to snore. Another thing is that he might want to go for a pee. The reason? It's chemicals again. Oxytocin and prolactin affect the kidneys, and this makes him run off to the bathroom. Some experts also think it's to clean the urethra from bacteria, a kind of natural need. It might also just be because he's been holding it in during all that messing around. He then finds the pee won't come out. That is normal, because for the sperm to come out, your internal sphincter muscle clamps, and this is to close the bladder. This is to stop the semen from entering the bladder. In a recent article in Cosmopolitan magazine, it was suggested that men who want to cuddle are keepers, but it also says that men who don't might just be succumbing to their own body's demands. You might find that your penis feels a bit sore, but this is just normal after all that contracting. Don't worry, it shouldn't last long. And don't be shocked if your testicles have shrunk, because this is normal too. A doctor talking to Men's Health magazine explained it like this. When you ejaculate, the cremaster muscle contracts and brings your testicles up closer to your body, giving you the perception that they're smaller. Lastly, you may get a cramp in the toe. Apparently this happens a lot, but it's just because orgasm causes stimulation in the nerves, especially S1 in the spinal column, and that nerve affects the toes. If you look at some research, it also says some men's moods change dramatically after sex, but given the release of all that tension and all those chemicals flooding out, that's not so surprising. Some men have reported feeling emotionally handicapped after a great orgasm, and that's thought to be because huge amounts of dopamine were released. It's like coming down from a drug that makes you feel happy or ecstatic. In women, the feelings can be similar, as we shall see. So, what about post-coital women? Well, women may not always orgasm. According to an article in Psychology Today, which cited a number of studies, around half of women will regularly orgasm during intercourse, about 20% of women rarely orgasm, 20% consistently orgasm, and 5% never orgasm. When they do, it's different from a man's one great push to the sun, as women have what has been called rapid rhythmic contractions. This can be quite the event, and some women certainly show this in their face, sometimes looking like they've had an ecstatic experience. These shockwaves go through her genitals, her anus, her uterus, and her pelvis, and she too will have a magnificent rush of chemicals flooding through her brain. She may experience female ejaculation, which is when a milky liquid will come out of her urethra. Don't worry women, there's nothing wrong with this. But what about when a lot of liquid comes out? A neurophysiologist from Rutgers University in Newark says it's not the same milky stuff if it comes out in large amounts. In that case, she says, it is urine diluted with substances from the female prostate. Scientists are still not clear as to why some women do this and others don't, but it's certainly not harmful. So, why are women often up for a chat about tomorrow's activities or the meaning of life, while some men are already halfway to La La Land? According to a study in the Netherlands undertaken in 2005, women are more focused than men during sex, their minds completely set to the task of reaching orgasm. This is because their amygdala and hippocampus, which regulate feelings, kind of turns off. They are at one with sex, well, at least if they are fully immersed in it. Once we've come, we return to our bodies, our consciousness recalibrates, and our emotional intelligence returns, said an article in Bustle about this phenomenon. But after sex, they switch back. And it's then they get that lovely hit of oxytocin, sometimes called the cuddle chemical. One study found that people with high levels of testosterone release less of this after sex, and men generally have high levels. Some women do too, of course, just not as much. So men, next time you turn over, blame your lack of oxytocin. And women may not experience a refractory period at all. This is the downtime men need to get ready to do it again. Note, teenagers may not need much downtime, but then again, sex doesn't always last that long for these hyper-carnal kids. Women are multi-orgasmic and they usually could just start again. But be careful there, women, because sex can be more painful for you than it can be for men. Women might cramp up in the uterus, and this is due to the cuddle drug oxytocin. Let's now call that the double-edged sword chemical. There might also be some burning because of the vaginal tissues getting dry, but lubrication can help. The stinging doesn't mean there is a problem, but obviously if it persists longer than a day or two, it might be something else. And if men see shrinkage, then women see the opposite. In their breasts at least. Many women's breasts get bigger after sex, and in some women by as much as 25%. According to Women's Health magazine, just how swollen the breasts become differs from woman to woman. The same article also said a woman's clitoris will become very small at point of orgasm, almost disappearing. At the same time, women's nipples may become more sensitive, but this is very natural. Other reports say some women become giddy after sex, and others feel great confidence, seeing their bodies as much more attractive than before. Most reports we can find state that while some women may experience a slump after the sex, it's the men that really suffer from depression, sometimes a week long. But as the saying goes, what goes up must come down, and most of the time, it's worth the ride.
A woman sits down to write a letter to a magazine advice column. Her husband is in the room next to her playing Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Every so often she can hear him curse and shout, at which point she grits her teeth in anger. He won't have sex with me, she writes, adding, the few times we've had sex, and I can count those on one hand, I had to beg for it. She's hoping someone will be able to explain what happened to this guy. Today, you'll find out. The example we just used is real. The woman claimed in the letter that her husband had slept with her once in the last 7 years. Just like that, he stopped. When she asked him what went wrong, he just told her it just stopped working, meaning his John Thomas. He explained to her that this is what happens to men in their 50s. She didn't believe him, blaming herself and her weight gain. In the last paragraph of the letter, she wrote, I'm isolated, bored, frustrated, lonely, rejected, unwanted, hurt, and angry. I'm sick of feeling like I'm selfish for wanting sex with my husband. Part of the reply she got was, it's about your husband's failings as a human being, about his self-hatred, about his ineptitude and his decline. But what if he just lost his sex drive? Can that happen? Does it happen more to men than women? Who has the strongest sex drive in nature in general? What do we really want sexually? Those are some questions we'll answer today, among many other fascinating things we'll discuss related to men and women wanting or not wanting to get it on. But first of all, what is a sex drive? Another term for it is libido. You can't measure it. It's not an actual part of your brain. It's just a thing we talk about in reference to how much a person wants to have sex. All humans have these things called sex hormones, which regulate through biological processes our wanting for sex. If such hormones were absent or for some reason depleted, we might lose our sex drive. For instance, certain drugs can affect those hormones, such as some antidepressants. But there's more to sex drive than chemical reactions. There's the psychological side too, such as you feeling the need for sex because you've become very attracted to someone. If a person really attracts you, your sex drive might go into hyperdrive. Or for a woman, her sex drive might get into third gear right before she ovulates, when the egg is released from her ovary. That's because her testosterone levels change during this stage of menstruation. This drive develops when we're very young, before we really understand sex at all. Then, when we go through puberty, it really gets going. Ask any teenage boy who's had to do his own laundry for fear of what his mother might discover. Boys generally get very horny at around the age of 15. This is the point in many boys' life when even sitting on a vibrating bus can cause a stir in his loins. Before this age, both boys and girls might get some kind of sexual interest in someone, but it can be vague. Still, one study showed that 25% of boys and girls as young as 11 or 12 reported that they think about sex. But when they hit their teens, something changes. It's in the early teens that many boys will start having sexual fantasies. What was previously a nascent and vague feeling about sex becomes something very much real. Only 10% of boys start masturbating at the age of 10, but by the time they're 11 or 12, it's around half of all boys that partake in the old five-knuckle shuffle. The vast majority of boys will slap the salami once they get to 13 and 14, while hardly any girls at all will masturbate before they are 13. From 13 to 14, only about 20% of girls will masturbate. These are rough figures we found in the book Puberty and Adolescent Sexuality. But we have to remember there are many factors as to when the sex drive develops and as to when it's acted upon, such as our culture. Scientists tell us that when guys are around that sometimes difficult age of 15, they're in the most hyper stage of horniness. This is due to their raging testosterone levels. With females, it's very different. Their sex drive really comes into full swing sometime in their 30s. Just as a man's libido might be in its first stage of waning, a woman's can really get going. This, of course, can sometimes cause problems in a relationship. It's akin to discovering Chocolate Mountain when your teeth have fallen out and your appetite isn't what it used to be. In short, men are fast starters, but women catch up. But that doesn't mean both men and women can't be involved in a sexual relationship right up until their 70s or even 80s. One study we found said 40% of adults aged 65 to 80 are sexually active, and more than half, 54%, say sex is important to their quality of life. That's not the kind of study children and grandchildren like reading when thinking about their parents and grandparents. But don't think for a minute, kids, that the older folks can't wear out the bed springs. According to a paper written by researchers at Manchester University's School of Social Sciences, there are some sexual survivors who just don't retire their sex organs. These are the folks that are still going at it in their 80s, and they are loving it. Still, these folks are in the minority. The paper said by the time we reach 85, only 1 in 10 women are still interested in sex, but for men it was a quarter of them. For men, though, their drive isn't always represented by a phallus that can stand straight up when it's needed to go to battle. Luckily for them, there are drugs these days that can help that little fella spring back to life. But as we said, there are more than biological concerns when it comes to sex drive. Plenty of women have hit stagnancy in the sexual realm in their middle ages and found in later life, when they met the right guy, their sex drive suddenly flourished again. And the same goes for men. There are social elements too, such as people thinking they're past it. Old folks might be stuck in a home for the elderly, which is not exactly a sexy environment, but some older people might use their retirement to travel the world where they find their sexuality explodes again. But what about in general? Do either men or women have a higher sex drive? You already know that young males have a stronger sex drive than young females, but in the case of the married couple in the intro, they were both grown up. It seems in that circumstance the woman had the stronger sex drive, but if science is correct, this is an anomaly. It's also likely the man just didn't find the woman sexually attractive anymore. He blamed his age, but was he secretly fantasizing about a younger woman? A man in his 50s wouldn't usually just lose his sex drive. In fact, males aged from their late teens to their 60s will think about sex on average once a day, although it's not easy to measure this, as you can understand. Still, men said they'll fantasize about sex a lot more when they're still young, but they'll keep fantasizing until they hit their winter years. Yep, your grandfather will more than likely still look at young women and imagine getting it on with them. A social psychologist at Florida State University named Roy Baumeister had made a name for himself studying the sex drive, as well as writing myriad well-known books on the matter such as Addiction. He researched the sex drive for a long time, and after interviewing scores of people, he discovered that men get sexually turned on in a spontaneous sense much more than women. He said men want sex more often than women at the start of the relationship, in the middle of it, and after many years of it. This goes for heterosexual men and homosexual men. He also found that men want a higher number of sexual relationships in their lives, and they're more down than women on average in having casual sex. Women focus more on having meaningful relationships, while men are generally more okay with having one-night stands and things like that. We know this sounds like an old-fashioned stereotype, but this is what researchers have found out. It seems men are just more simple in regard to sex. They look at women and some chemical reactions go off in their heads, and they wouldn't mind jumping into bed with this woman. Women, on the other hand, will be aroused often only when other environmental factors are involved. As another researcher put it, sexual desire in women is extremely sensitive to environment and context. This social scientist wrote the book, The Social Organization of Sexuality, Sexual Practices in the United States. In a purely evolutionary sense, a male might want to spread his seed to as many women as possible if they look like they could provide him some offspring and proliferate his genes. But with women, it doesn't make evolutionary sense to sleep with any old man. They'll be looking for a suitable mate. As for masturbation, around 2/3 of adult men, married or not, will carry on beating the beaver. More so, of course, if they're not in a healthy sexual relationship. Still, they'll usually knock the odd one out on the sly even if they are with someone. On the other hand, only about 40% of adult women report masturbating, and if they do it less often than men. Men also seek out more sex when it comes at a cost. The vast majority of prostitution is men seeking women or other men, rather than women seeking another woman or a man. Even priests who've taken a vow of celibacy seek sex more than nuns seek sex. So, what's going on inside men and women? It's hard to say, but one researcher at Northwestern University tried to figure it out by conducting a sex study. She showed the participants a series of erotic movies while a device was attached to their genital areas to measure how turned on they were. The participants were asked how aroused they felt. The straight guys in the study told the researchers that what moved them the most was watching male-to-female sex, but also female-to-female. Those devices told the researchers this was very true. As for homosexual men, they were aroused by seeing male-to-male sex. The women in the study said they were the most aroused by watching male-to-female sex. Maybe they weren't telling the truth though, because the devices showed they were just as aroused watching men having sex with men and women having sex with women. One of the researchers concluded men are very rigid and specific about who they become aroused by, who they want to have sex with, and who they fall in love with. He said women are more open in general to having same-sex relationships, and while they might not do it, they have more of a capacity to do it. That's why more women report being bisexual than men. In terms of making out with people willy-nilly, women who were interviewed showed that many things influenced who they'd have sex with. If the person went to church mattered, but it didn't with men. With women, their friends had an effect on who they'd sleep with, but not so much with men. The study even said that education counted for something with women. The more educated a woman was, the more up for experimenting she was, such as giving and receiving oral sex. Education didn't seem to make a difference when it came to men. And all the researchers said that men certainly seem to have a higher sex drive and they are less vulnerable to outside factors when it comes to having sex. But is this just plain old-fashioned thinking? It wasn't too long ago that women were expected to hide their sexual feelings and impulses. That might still be true in some cultures, but it seems that men do want more sex with more women, and it doesn't have to involve a lot of proceeding chasing. Another researcher said women like a story, they're more complex. An example is that a lot of those online apps that tell a sexual story are dedicated to women. Women like a plot, men are okay with a paragraph. One researcher explained it like this: women want to talk first, connect first, then have sex. For men, sex is the connection. Sex is the language men use to express their tender, loving, vulnerable side. It's their language of intimacy. Maybe some of you have started falling in love and said to yourself, if she liked me, she'd sleep with me. Maybe the woman thinks if he really liked me, he'd wait and let this story flower into something more than a bedboard banging against the wall. Even a woman's orgasm is more complex. With guys, they're usually done within 4 minutes. That's when they're grown up. When that guy who has the stiff socks has sex for the first time, he's more likely to last 4 seconds. But the average woman, young or old, would take on average 11 minutes to reach orgasm if she reaches it at all. In couples, men reported having an orgasm during sex 75% of the time, but with women it was more like 25%. The funny thing is, the men in the study said their partners reached orgasm 45% of the time. As for that couple in their 50s we talked about at the start, other studies have shown that it's actually women who generally lose interest in sex first. Sure, the guy could have had some kind of erectile dysfunction, which can happen to men as they age, but it's possible his member would have worked in different circumstances. Citing another study, the BBC reported that women were twice as likely to lose their sex drive when in a relationship. But this wasn't always about biology. It was often the result of a lack of emotional closeness. The study was undertaken by the British Medical Journal and involved 5,000 men and 6,700 women. Of those people, 15% of the men said they've lost all interest in sex for a period of 3 months or more in the last year. But for women, it was 34%. Nonetheless, with men, the sex drive started faltering between the ages of 35 and 44, and with women, it was between the ages of 55 and 64. Again, though, just because the sexual flame had died didn't mean the sex drive is gone for good. Various circumstances such as hard work or kids or even boredom play a part, but the drive would still be there if things were different. And if you think about what we'd already said, if men's sex drives are not as complex and they're more willing to jump into bed with more people, they will likely be having more sex at an older age than women. It's likely that as time goes on, men will feel more of a need to spread their seed than women will want to have sex for sex sake. For some, it's all they can think about: sex. But one question many people have is, why? Why is sex such an important desire for many people? Why do we actually have sex? Sure, there is an obvious answer. It's necessary for procreation. Everyone knows that when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much, well, you know the rest. But for all sexually dimorphic creatures in the animal kingdom, having sex is the primary way to expand the population. Sure, there are some exceptions. Some sea creatures reproduce in non-contact ways, with the male fertilizing eggs after a female lays them. And human reproductive science has found ways around medical difficulties in conceiving, using technologies like in vitro fertilization to make babies possible for people without doing it the old-fashioned way. But for the most part, if people want to make a baby, or in the case of rabbits, lots of babies, they'd better get busy. For humans, having a baby is a pretty involved thing. 9 months of gestation and only one offspring at a time in the vast majority of cases. This is similar for many larger mammals, but for smaller mammals and other types of animals, it's common to have a lot more babies and much quicker. So it's not a surprise that humans take picking a partner for having a baby more seriously. It's a pretty big investment. But there are plenty of other reasons that motivate people to have sex. For one thing, we might be physically wired to have the desire for sex. Our brain patterns are formed from countless generations of evolution, and we're born with certain instincts that lead us to natural behaviors. One of those behaviors is sex, and that influences a lot of other decisions we make. It's not hard to see why our brains are hardwired for this purpose. Keeping the species going is the ultimate natural instinct, and while there is no shortage of population now, it was a much bigger priority in ages past, when life expectancy was shorter and nature was filled with many more threats. And more offspring means more genetic variety in the population. But humans are complicated creatures, and there are many different things that motivate us. For one thing, sex feels really good. This is called body-centered sex, and it's the most basic reason that drives sexual attraction, and sometimes sexual addiction. Even without being concerned for the emotions of a partner, the feeling of sexual stimulation can be a powerful driving force. This triggers an effect called an orgasm that can be a powerful rush of pleasure and feel-good chemicals. This is why many people enjoy self-stimulation. It's an easy way to get this pleasure high without having to deal with the complex emotions of sexual relations. For many people, though, those complex emotions are still the main selling point. Sex is one of the most powerful connections someone can have with their partner, and having sex is an expression of trust and unity. Whether it's after a long relationship or after a whirlwind courtship, deciding to have sex with someone is often seen as a major step and a decision to commit to them. Before, during, and after the act, there's a feeling of becoming one and making a decision that'll set the tone for the rest of your time together. Some choose to wait until after marriage or engagement to make this step, but others find their own meaningful moment to take the jump, and that feeling can continue well after the first time. For those in a permanent or recurring relationship, having sex with someone they trust can be a stress reliever. If they've had a hard day at work and are worried about something, they might crave affection and close contact with their partner. Initiating sex might be a way to push the unpleasantness of the day away and instead focus on something familiar and calming. While the actual act of sex is enjoyable as always, these situations are often almost as much about the closeness with a partner. Of course, sometimes the heat cools, but the love doesn't. Sometimes, especially in long-term relationships, sex can be a matter of duty and familiarity. It's common for older couples, parents, and very busy two-career couples set aside regular time to have sex, often one day a week, but sometimes more infrequently. This is something to look forward to, but it's also a different kind of commitment. It's a way to reconnect and remind each other of how they feel about each other, even if it's not as often as it used to be. But what about those who haven't experienced it before? One of the most powerful motivators for having sex is, for some people, not having had it before. We've all seen the teen comedies where the kids scheme to lose their virginity, or in one case where a certain 40-year-old virgin does. This is often driven by the curiosity and other social factors. All they know is that sex is the greatest thing around and everyone's doing it but them. It's more about getting a prize and answering those questions than anything else. Oftentimes, that first time doesn't live up to the hype and can be confusing and awkward. But what would you expect? When's the last time you did something perfectly on the first try? But there are some less savory reasons that people might have sex. Tied into curiosity, one reason many people want to have sex for the first time is for social status. After all, if all the cool kids are talking about having sex, the nerds are going to want to prove they can do it too. Some might try to lie and join in, but what might be more embarrassing than getting caught in a lie about this? So instead, those looking to join the cool kids just seek out every opportunity to have their first time, whether it's going to be a time to remember or a time they wish they could forget. Some reasons for having sex can be downright cruel. Jealousy has been a thing since the early days, and people have gone to extreme lengths over it ever since the first caveman clubbed his neighbor over the head to take his cave. But some people use sex to try to create jealousy. Say a man has a crush on a woman, but she's not interested. Maybe he finds another woman to have a relationship with and tries to flaunt it around his real obsession to make her jealous. The sex might be enjoyable, but he's never really plugged into it or enjoying being with the woman he's with. It's all about ulterior motives. And some people use sex for cruel intentions. Having sex with someone is considered a sacred bond of trust by many people, and that makes it all the more shocking when someone uses it for revenge. We've all seen this happen on soap operas, usually ending with a dramatic slap to the face. Maybe someone has a fight with a teammate on the football team, so they decide to make him angry by putting the moves on his sister. Or maybe after a nasty breakup, a girl decides to make her ex-boyfriend sorry by sleeping with his best friend. Whatever the motivation, the odds are pretty strong that the sex won't lead to a healthy relationship in these cases. Of course, sometimes a healthy relationship isn't the goal. For some people, sex is just a stepping stone to another kind of success. It's a door into a relationship with someone who has something they want. This is common when someone from a lower socioeconomic class wants to climb the ladder. If they wind up marrying the boss's daughter, they might be in for a plum position at the company. Sometimes this can be combined with genuine attraction and turn into a healthy relationship, but more likely it'll wind up in a televised divorce proceeding on reality TV. Of course, for some people, the sex is truly all that matters. Sex addiction is when the sex drive or libido goes haywire and consumes a person's life. This is when the how, who, and why of sex doesn't really matter. Only the act does. People who struggle with sex addiction may just tire of their partner, but it often gets out of control, and they wind up patronizing prostitutes or getting into casual sexual encounters that potentially expose them to sexually transmitted diseases. When sex addiction gets bad enough, it can ruin relationships and jobs. The good news is, no matter why you're having sex, your body has reasons to celebrate. Did you know that having sex is actually exercise? Maybe this shouldn't be a surprise, given how good it feels to lie down in bed and relax after a vigorous outing with your partner. It feels great, but you're exhausted, and there's a reason for that. Studies show that having sex raises your heart rate around the same level as a quick walk or riding your bike at a regular pace. This means that regular sex could play a role in keeping your body healthy, without the cost of a gym membership. And there are other possible health benefits for why your body craves sex. Having an orgasm creates a surge of hormones in your brain, particularly endorphins and oxytocin. These reduce pain and make it easier to relax, and that means it's a lot easier to fall asleep, especially if you're struggling with chronic pain or have a nagging headache. While this works in both men and women, studies show the effect is more dramatic in men. This means that having sex could be the key to a good night's sleep. But women have their own unique advantage. Studies show that women who have sex several times a week are less likely to develop heart disease compared to women who only have sex once a month or less. Why this is the case isn't clear. Some speculate that healthy women might just be more likely to have sex, but having sex is also heart-healthy exercise. So even if it's correlation rather than a cause, the heart knows what it wants might have more than one meaning. And having sex regularly might even impact the brain. Studies done on people over 50 who had regular sex showed that they have an improved ability to remember number patterns and better math skills. While this effect was more significant in men, it was true in both genders, and indicated that sex might help to keep the brain fresh. Is sex helping to generate new brain cells? It's known that it's as much a mental activity as it is a physical one, and this seems to indicate that there could be long-term benefits for memory and mental skills. There's even evidence that sex might help keep you alive longer. One study on married women showed a minor link between having sex more often and living longer. While there's no way to prove this is a cause, there are many possible explanations. One might be that having regular sex is an indication that the marriage is healthy, active, and passionate, which could reduce stress and improve mental health. Another possibility could be that more healthy people are simply more likely to have sex. But the odds are this study made a lot of people go, hey, couldn't hurt. One thing's for sure, our bodies seem wired to want sex in more ways than one. It's been shown in studies that adults in committed relationships report less incidences of depression or mental health issues if they're having regular sex. This connection with their partner and the regular release of endorphins seems to have a positive effect on mental health. But this only works when a person has someone they trust to share that bond with. The stress of searching out unfamiliar partners might undo that benefit and actually add more stress. One thing seems clear: the reasons people have sex are a complex mix of physical, mental, and emotional issues combined with a hardwired instinct to seek opportunities to continue the species. I bet those rabbits in the meadows have less on their mind. Picture a guy from the US who's decided it's time to spread his wings and get out of the town he's pretty much never left. He heads to some distant land he knows absolutely nothing about, and from the moment he gets there, he's somehow incredibly popular. No sooner than he's learned how to order a bottle of beer in the local language, he's hooked up with someone. But as some of you well-traveled viewers might know, what happens in the bedroom in the United States might not happen everywhere. This guy soon finds himself completely out of his depth and wondering what he's gotten himself into. Make sure you don't make the same mistake by watching this to find out some of the most confounding sexual practices you've ever heard of in your life. Let's start in Indonesia, where there's a pilgrimage people take to a place called Mount Kemukus, aka Sex Mountain. Every year, folks from all across Indonesia head to this part of Central Java for, you guessed it, sex. But it's more than just that, it's sex with a complete stranger. As the story goes, a long time ago a prince eloped from his town with a woman and tried to have a fun time there. They didn't quite finish the job and were chased away by soldiers and later killed. A kind of ritual has since emerged, which involves going there and meeting a stranger. Only this time they do what the prince and his lover couldn't and finish the job. And that's not all, they must continue to meet up and do so 7 more times throughout the year. If they end up fulfilling the quota, they'll then be blessed with good fortune, which we're sure is the only reason that men and women flock there, married or not, to hook up with a stranger. If you're thinking, no way that's a real thing, think again. In 2014, the governor of the province of Central Java laid down restrictions on what happens there. He banned the practice, saying it was not moral and there was a risk of contracting various diseases. He also said it made Indonesia look bad in the eyes of other countries. We'll let you decide if he was right about that last part. Still, Indonesian news reports in 2017 said the stalls and huts erected for the deed had reopened, and people were getting it on for good luck once again. You see, the business had been booming there before it was all closed down. Many people enjoyed the freedom of the ritual, and in turn, that provided lots of business for locals at Sex Mountain. When the ritual was banned, they lost their means of making money. The entry fee alone was around 50 cents, which doesn't sound like much, but on good nights there were about 8,000 pilgrims. In the past, when all huts and stalls weren't around, the people just did it behind trees, so you could call the enterprising locals a good thing for everyone. They even opened karaoke stalls to perhaps get people in the mood. You might wonder if the fortune actually does shine down on the pilgrims after their year of hooking up is over. Well, one woman who'd partaken told Australian News, "Praise be to God, after coming here, even though I have a few debts, my business is making a bit of a profit." Next up is a nomadic tribe in West Africa called the Wadabi. They don't have a written language themselves, but this word has been translated as people of the taboo. What's taboo in many parts of the world is having more than one marriage partner, which is known as polygamy. This tribe doesn't mind at all, though. In fact, they embrace it. Every year, there's something called the Gariwal Festival, and during the big party that happens, the guys get dressed up to the nines to show their beauty. In fact, this tribe might just think it has the most beautiful men in the world. These people are also what you might call especially liberated, having no qualms about the very natural things that often makes Westerners blush. The men, with painted faces and feathers on their head, dance and look wonderful for the onlooking women in the tribe. It's said they take a kind of drink that helps them to dance for hours on end and also provides a hypnotic effect. It's like a very colorful beauty contest, because then all the women will choose the most attractive men. If the women are partnered with someone already, no problem, they can put themselves forward as someone who wants to steal another man as a new husband. If they don't want to go all out and steal a guy, they can just elect to sleep with him. If the guy walks past her, she just needs to brush him on the shoulder and they will be together. It totally doesn't matter about the previous partner. The guys don't get much say in the matter, though. There are some rules, however. Usually, when a woman is old enough, an arranged marriage will take place. Once she becomes pregnant, she goes to live with her mom and can't see the husband. After some time, she can go back to him, but she might just decide during the festival to sleep with another guy or steal one. One tribesman told National Geographic, "We get to go to the Gariwal for pleasure. I get a woman, then fine, it's a bonus. When a guy is incredibly hot, he's called Keijo Naado, hurting man, because he's so gorgeous it hurts to look at him." And just to set things straight, you have the word polygamy, which means marriage between more than two people. Then you have polygyny, which is when a man has more than one wife. And then there's polyandry, when a woman has more than one husband. It's not all that common, but it happens in various parts of the world. It's somewhat different from having a mistress, though. In Thailand, a man may often take what the Thais call Mia Noi, which literally means small wife, often called a second wife by Westerners. It's not actually legal in Thai law, but you have a documented marriage and you also have an undocumented marriage, in which a wedding ceremony still happens, but nothing is officially signed. In the past, when women have had fewer opportunities, this was widespread, but not so much now. In 2021, a video went viral in Thailand that features a man secretly marrying another wife. The guy in question, a cop, got the shock of his life when his real wife's mother-in-law walked into the ceremony and gave him a hard smack across the head. The attending monks were less than impressed, but despite the chaos, the ceremony went ahead. His real wife, who later showed news cameras their marriage certificate, was understandably angry, seeing as they'd been together 15 years and had 2 kids. Believe it or not, in the past, Thai women's magazines would say tolerating such a thing was the mark of a good wife. Maybe a small wife might be too much, but many Thai women have turned a blind eye to a man for having what you might call a bit on the side. That's what Thais call a gik. To understand this, you have to understand what some Thais now think of as outdated traditional values. These old values held that there was something called kulasatri, which meant an ideal woman. She was demure, quiet, and certainly wasn't outwardly sexual. She wasn't even meant to have sexual thoughts. Meanwhile, male masculinity was defined by something called chai chatri. Under this, men were supposed to have irrepressible, uncontrollable sexual desires that could never be limited to their one spouse. It doesn't seem fair to most of us and wouldn't be seen as fair by most modern Thais either, but it still happens, quite a lot. This is evident in a Durex poll that had Thais top of the infidelity ratings, and before you ask, this has nothing to do with Thailand's notorious red light districts, which only actually make up a few streets in the entire country. It's actually these old cultural values that pervade most of the nation and lead to a culture of infidelity. Not to say women will tolerate cheating these days, or at least the majority of women won't. That's perhaps reflected in the fact that Thailand is arguably the leader in penis reattachment surgery. This has led to the international media asking why Thailand has an epidemic of penile amputations. There's even an old saying men sometimes say to other men, about which goes, "I better get home or the ducks will have something to eat." The men are often hypocrites too, given that many men have a zero tolerance when their ideal woman cheats. It can often and does regularly lead to him killing her. You might wonder why the second wives marry the guy. It's often down to financial security or just the security of keeping him. The first wife might not want to break up with the guy, either because women divorcing men is frowned upon in traditional settings, or because she has limited opportunities in life to take care of the family he'll leave behind. The woman whose mother whacked the cheating husband was well aware he had a gik, but she turned a blind eye to it. She told reporters, "I initially did not think that my husband would wed. Before the wedding, he was still staying at home with me, and he told me he would be going out to work a night shift at his station." In some cultures, having more than one spouse is not just accepted, it's normal. Academic studies, for instance, have shown that in parts of India, China, and Nepal, a woman might have more than one husband. One such paper published in 2019 was titled Marital Satisfaction and Well-Being Among Fraternal Polyandrous and Monogamous Tribal People of Kinnar. Fraternal polyandry is when one woman is married to 2 or more brothers, and Kinnar is a district in northern India. The paper concluded this after spending time with some of these families. The result, based on qualitative research, revealed that polyandrous couples' physical health, economical, and psychological well-being is better, and they feel positive toward life. But why is that? The paper said those families felt secure together and they had financial security. It said a woman in those tribes with only one husband felt less financially secure than a woman who had married 2 or more brothers. The brothers also said they felt more secure. The Toda tribe of South India have also practiced these kind of marriages, but that may have now stopped. Still, it was explained that when a child is born to one of the brothers, he would hand the wife a bow and arrow and become the father of the child. If another child was born to another brother, he would do the same. In certain regions of India, Nepal, and Tibet, various practices of polygamy happened throughout history, although it's not common now. In a northern part of India called Jansarbawar, in some places a woman would marry the eldest son and then she immediately became the wife of all his younger brothers. It got tricky though, since the brothers could have more than one wife if their older brother was much older and the age difference was vast between his brothers and the wife. In that case, a brother could find his own new wife. If all the brothers stayed together with the one wife, none of them had any kind of exclusive right to her. All brothers were seen as equal and the kids looked on them as one father. In some countries in the recent past, such as parts of Tibet, the eldest brother would be seen as the main husband. A study published in 2008 said among the villages of Shigaz and Kamdo in Tibet, it was found that 20 to 50% of families were made up of a wife and 2 husbands. In some more remote areas, the researchers said 90% of the families were polyandric. To understand why, just imagine how difficult life is in some of those unforgiving mountainous areas. Weird to us maybe, but arguably an act of survival for others. Laws in Tibet have long since made it illegal, but the marriage will sometimes be documented between the wife and just the eldest brother. In most countries, a man's member is kept locked firmly behind closed doors, where it's barely noticeable unless he's wearing his favorite pair of tight Speedos. In some of the more remote parts of New Guinea, though, that's not always the case. There, the penis can have its own clothing accessory. This is called a koteka, which looks something like a gourd and covers the penis while being strapped to the waist. It can be long and thin or short and wide and can point in any direction that the wearer chooses. Obviously, when a man is working, a smaller koteka would be preferable. But if they're worn as a way of attracting a female, though, it's still up for debate. It might be only worn as a way of covering up as well as a way of looking good. Still, you have to wonder if some women favor a bigger koteka. The Sambia people of Papua New Guinea are heavily focused on what you might refer to as the warrior culture. When the boys are very young, usually around the age of 7, they're taken away from their mothers. In some ways, this is to toughen them up, and there are some comparisons to the training known as Paides in the ancient Sparta. But with the Sambia, it's because the boys need to be detached from what's believed to be the contaminated blood of the mother. It's said that in each woman there's something called tingu, which has the power to manipulate men. When the boy gets a little older, he might be around younger women who also have tingu in their blood. Since her tingu gets stronger during her menstrual period, during that time a woman is kept away from males completely. Okay, so if women have this sorcery that they can use to manipulate men, how do couples ever get together? Well, when the boys are old enough, they are taught how to safely have sex without being trapped by a woman's tingu. One way is to kind of disassociate himself from her and not get too heated in the act of sex. He should also try to prevent her from enjoying herself too much, lest she make him become sick and he possibly die. Once copulation is over, he goes through a bloodletting ceremony which is supposed to decontaminate him of her tingu. This happens until she gets pregnant, and then after she has the child, he can become a fully fledged warrior. In the 1990s, people who visited these very remote tribes said times were apparently changing though. Supposedly something called love marriage was occurring from time to time. And in those marriages, they didn't include all the fear and ceremony we've just described. In a 2006 book, the writer called this shift nothing less than revolutionary. While many of us take kissing for granted, this romantic, full-on, juices shared lips bitten kind of affair is utterly disgusting to people in some cultures. Researchers at the University of Nevada explained that when the Mehinaku of Brazil were asked about kissing, the general reply was that it was gross, with one asking, "Why would you want to share your dinner with someone?" Fair point, and let's be honest, no one wants to see anyone devouring each other's tonsils on the subway. In another paper, researchers found in some other cultures that there was no kissing at all. The Aka Pygmies didn't do it, and when questioned about sex, they said it was basically to make a child and nothing more. One person referred to sex as a night's work. According to the website This Is Africa, the Tonga tribe in Mozambique think much the same way, saying kissing is unhygienic, and when they see Westerners do it, they just think about someone eating dirt. And the last, but certainly not least strange romantic custom comes from Iran. There they have something known as Saihohu, which means a man and a woman can have a temporary marriage, explore each other's bodies, and if after some amount of time they decide they're not right for one another, they can annul the marriage with ease. You might ask why someone would do this, and doesn't it sound a lot like short marriages in the US? Well, for one thing, this marriage might only last for an hour, or perhaps a day, or maybe even a few days, which even in the US would be very unusual. You see, in Iran, just getting it on with someone you aren't married to is considered sinful and also illegal. That's one reason why men meet women online and then they head to the city, get a temporary marriage, book a hotel room, do what they have to do, then get divorced. As human rights advocates have pointed out, since not being a virgin before marriage is also considered sinful, this can have negative effects on women in the long run. It's also been called a way of having legal prostitution. The Iranian cyber police have said some websites will even help with a match and then do all the paperwork for the marriage. They can even book someone a hotel. It's like Tinder, Airbnb, and a priest all in the same app. Saihohu is supposed to provide a way for a woman to keep her chastity since she is technically married when she has sex, but she still becomes stigmatized after. This is what one young Iranian man had to say about the practice. "If I temporarily marry a young woman for 3 years and then divorce her, would anyone be willing to marry her? It would be impossible that any man would want to have a family with this woman." Still, some Iranian women have happily made use of the law. One woman told the New York Times about her relationship. "We went out a lot together and I didn't want to get into trouble. We wanted to have documents so that if we were stopped on the street, we could prove that we weren't doing anything illegal. She and her husband renewed their marriage after 6 months and then they did it again. We don't know how things ended though." A British-Canadian woman in 2015 talked to The Guardian about her dating experience in Iran. She said she was hounded by police and others while out in public with a man, asking how they knew each other and what they were up to. She said, "In public, I had to face the opposite direction and pretend to read." She got a temporary marriage and said it actually allowed her and her lover to live a normal life. "It was like a bubble. We were in love and no one bothered us. It was beautiful," she said. A month later, and she was on the plane out of there. But there's a happy ending. It took some time, but he eventually moved to the UK and they were remarried in London, this time for longer than a day. Addiction. It's when something that started as normal use becomes a compulsion that slowly consumes your life, with the desire to get more occupying your every waking thought. Most addictions are to a substance, with the most common being nicotine, alcohol, and various drugs. The common treatment is to go cold turkey with a support system that keeps you from relapsing. But what happens when your addiction is to a basic biological imperative? That's sex addiction, and it's surprisingly common. A compulsion to have sex is nothing new. Everyone's familiar with sex drive, also known as the libido. A combination of biological, psychological, and social factors, the sex drive is driven by a combination of neurotransmitters and hormones including dopamine and either testosterone or estrogen. Production of these hormones varies in different people, and some people may have a much higher sex drive than others. So, what sets sex addiction apart from a high sex drive? Well, that depends on who you ask. Scientists differ on whether seeking sex compulsively actually qualifies as an addiction, and it's not a clinical diagnosis in the DSM yet. However, other mental health experts have observed a surprising number of people who have trouble controlling intense and frequent sexual desires that lead to self-destructive behavior. The team behind the International Classification of Diseases did create their own category for it, officially titled compulsive sexual behavior. So, how many people are battling sex addiction? Well, that depends on how you define it. If you consider everyone who's dealing with sex-related issues, that number could be as high as 16% of people. But if you look at more severe symptoms and try to pinpoint a definition of sex addiction, it's closer to between 3 and 6%. That's still a lot of people who haven't had a name for their condition until recently. And one thing stands out in many studies of sex addiction: men are almost twice as likely to develop this addiction as women. So, what causes sex addiction? Is it a purely psychological condition, or is there something deeper at work? Scientists have looked at many possible causes. Psychologists have observed that those who display symptoms of sex addiction often begin their sex lives at an early age, and many have experienced serious trauma as a kid. That leads to many to believe that it's an unhealthy coping mechanism for people who never had the opportunity to develop their sex drive at an older age. And getting to the root of the trauma and addressing it may be the best treatment approach. Others argue it may be a symptom of borderline personality disorder, which many people with a tendency toward promiscuity are diagnosed with. Others argue that it might be an imbalance in natural hormones and neurotransmitters causing the addiction. Those taking medications that affect their dopamine production have been observed to develop a syndrome that can result in compulsive sexual activity or gambling. So, how to research this condition beyond talking to people who experience it? Time to call on the researchers' most reliable tool: rats. Compulsive sexual behavior isn't exclusive to humans, as anyone who's seen a bunch of wild rabbits would know. Scientists studying rats that display compulsive sexual behavior have observed that this behavior is driven by the same mechanisms in the brain that affect drug addiction. This is the clearest proof yet that sex addiction is a genuine addiction, but it's complicated by the fact that sexual addiction is not an outside stimulant. It's a natural instinct that acts as a positive reinforcer. Naturally perceived by the brain as a reward, it triggers the instinct to seek it, and the brain responds accordingly. Finding the line between the natural desire for sexual activity and the emergence of an addiction is one of the biggest challenges facing researchers. And that's one of the challenges facing sex addiction sufferers too. Where does the line change between a desire and an addiction? As more sex addiction sufferers come forward, a portrait is emerging of people whose desire for sex takes over every single part of their life. Most sex addicts don't have any physical symptoms, so there's no withdrawal period due to the lack of chemical addiction. The symptoms are mostly emotional, and many report that their fixation on sex makes it impossible to concentrate on anything else. They're thinking about sex when they go to work or school, when they're driving, even when they're trying to fall asleep at night. When not having sex, they report feeling empty. That leads them to seek out or stay in relationships that may be far from healthy. Being in a relationship for a sex addict is tricky in its own right. The best bet for a sex addict to have a healthy relationship would probably be to find someone else with a very high sex drive so they can keep each other satisfied, but that's treating the symptoms, not the addiction. It's very easy for that relationship to go off the rails as soon as they're separated, because sex addiction is an insatiable beast. When an addict's first choice for sex isn't around, they might quickly slip into bad habits. That can include having an affair or seeking out a sex worker, either of which could not only destroy their relationship, but leave them and their partner vulnerable to sexually transmitted disease. Making it trickier, sex addiction is a disorder, but it may be one of many. People have come forward with addictions to many different types of sex, some driven by the digital world we live in. Some people have become addicted to masturbation, becoming obsessed with pleasuring themselves even in inappropriate situations. A prominent journalist was recently caught masturbating on a Zoom chat. He claimed he thought it was off, but that didn't save his job. Others report an addiction to pornography, which is easier to get than ever thanks to the internet, although it does carry the risk of a very different kind of virus. Others have a compulsion to expose themselves in public or spy on others, which can lead to serious legal trouble. These are all related to sex addiction, and people can have one or more, which can often mingle with other addictions. Treatment and support are available now, but it wasn't always that way. As sex addiction becomes more recognized as a disorder, many sex addicts are coming forward with their stories of just how far they would go to satisfy their urges. Many are just starting to dig out from all the relationship, professional, and legal trouble their addiction caused them and are sharing their stories in anonymous forums. One man was so fixated on sex that he would patronize online hookup sites for anonymous sex. This obsession became so strong that he eventually started skipping out on his job in the middle of the day to meet up with partners. This continued until he got caught up in his latest hookup and missed an important meeting. A quick dismissal from his job soon followed as he hit rock bottom. Other sex addicts use their addiction to cover up for other stressors in life. A successful businessman's marriage was already in trouble when he started giving in to his compulsion to hire prostitutes. It didn't take long for his wife to figure out a lot of money was going missing, and she demanded he stop. So he promised he would, but he actually started opening new accounts, hiding his money, and getting deeper and deeper into the world of compulsive sex. And that's only the start of the trouble sex addicts can find themselves in without treatment. Addictive behaviors often go together, and people who are susceptible to one are vulnerable to others. One woman had a stable relationship with her husband until he wanted their active sex life to involve drugs. At first, she agreed, but his drug use grew out of control and put them both in danger. She pulled away, but he got sucked deeper and deeper into his addiction and concealed his addictions from her. Another man was used to drinking pretty heavily as part of his social scene. He liked to ask random women for selfies and use them as his personal connection for pleasuring himself. He built a massive collection thanks to lowering his own inhibitions by drinking heavily, and didn't realize how out of control he had become until his daughter discovered his secret collection and was horrified. Other sex addicts find themselves hitting even lower rock bottoms as they get arrested for soliciting sex workers or having public sex. Others contract sexually transmitted diseases that they then spread quickly as they move through sexual partners. The good news is, there's more help now than ever before. So what's the best treatment for those struggling with sex addiction? Many sex addicts seek counseling, but the counseling field is still split on whether sex addiction is a real diagnosis. The official regulatory bodies for sex and relationship therapy haven't accepted sex addiction as its own disorder, so the job of counseling those with sex addiction usually falls to experts of another sort, addiction specialists. While these counselors may not have much experience with sex addiction, they've counseled countless other people on how to handle addictions that are consuming their lives. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which is common for treating other addictions, has been used to help sex addicts learn coping methods and behaviors to control their urges and keep them from disrupting their lives. But there's another key element often missing from treatment: support. Ever since Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in 1935 by Bill Wilson and Bob Smith, anonymous groups where addicts can share their stories and offer support to those struggling have been a cornerstone of addiction counseling. The programs have since expanded to groups supporting those struggling with addiction to narcotics, gambling, and overeating, as well as groups for family members supporting their loved ones with addiction. Multiple groups dedicated to helping sex addicts have emerged, including an online forum named NoFap and several in-person support groups. But there's just one problem: not all of them agree on what the best approach is. Sex addiction is a newly diagnosed disorder, and there's been relatively little research done in it compared to other addictions. That means different groups interpret the best way to help addicts differently. The most famous group, Sexaholics Anonymous, has a strict definition of sexual sobriety and helps those who want to go cold turkey on casual sex, pornography, and masturbation. Others, like Smart Recovery and Sex Addicts Anonymous, have a more flexible definition and help their members find a balance that gets their addiction under control. Many people who don't have any of these groups in their area attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings without sharing why they're there and try to apply the 12 steps to their own addiction. But what about those who are struggling to get their addiction under control? Getting a major compulsion to a manageable level can be a long process, so many counselors are taking another step to protect their patients as they recover. Because many sex addicts engage in risky sex with people they don't know, some take pre-exposure prophylaxis during the early stages of recovery. This drug, covered by most insurance plans, is a preventative measure that helps to prevent HIV infections. It's favored by people who aren't ready to go cold turkey on their sex habits, but want to avoid infection while they work toward recovery. Is society ready to address the topic of sex addiction like they do other addictions? Indications are mixed. Sex addiction first became known as a term in the 70s as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous tried to apply their 12-step program to those struggling with compulsive infidelity. But many people still argue over the classification of the disorder. Some worry about the risks of classifying sexual activity as a disorder and argue that it could be used to stigmatize people with healthy, active sex drives. Others argue that it's not an addiction at all, but rather a form of compulsive behavior and should be treated differently. But even as the controversy persists, the disorder becomes more well-known. Movies like Shame, Diary of a Sex Addict, and Don John help to raise awareness and give people compassion for those troubled by the disorder. The number of support groups is growing, and those seeking help for sex addiction are finding more people who have battled the disorder to welcome them as they start their own fight. It takes a couple of attempts, but you manage to spark up a lighter and hold it up steadily in front of your face to light up a joint. A familiar woody smell fills the room and drifts out of your window on the afternoon breeze. You blink, steady yourself, inhale deeply, and fill your lungs up with warmth. But what happens next? Chemically speaking, biologically speaking, what is it about this little green plant that gets millions of people around the world to flock to it? How long has humanity been consuming it? And what exactly is it doing inside your body, inside your mind? To start, let's have a look at the chemical composition of the cannabis plant itself, rolled up in a joint in your hand. Native to Central and South Asia, the cannabis plant today is so popular, it's now grown to be a global economy of its own. From small-scale rural farming operations all the way through to drug super labs, including any number of illegal weed farms somewhere in the middle. Experts believe that there are well over 700 different strains of cannabis currently on the market, and this number seems only set to increase. Being able to identify which strain of weed you have in your hand can be very easy when buying from a legal dispensary. But if you live in a country or a state where marijuana is still criminalized, being able to verify exactly what it is you're smoking becomes more difficult. Looking down at the green mossy balls in your hand, do you know where in the world it's come from and what's inside it? Let's break it down a bit, or rather, grind it down. You've likely heard of the two most well-known active ingredients in cannabis. These are cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabinol, or as you probably know them, CBD and THC. Over the last 10 years in the West in particular, CBD has been championed as a potential medical breakthrough. It's also been shown to have a calming effect on those with anxious disorders and is currently being tested as a treatment for psychosis, sleep disorders, muscle spasticity, and more. You might have seen ads for CBD oil products popping up in your feed claiming that it can solve any number of ailments. Research is ongoing, however, results vary. In the case of curing cancer, for example, so far there's no evidence to support that CBD has any kind of effect on the disease, despite what people on the internet might be saying. So, you smoke CBD to get high, right? No, CBD is usually extracted as an oil, and on its own it will not get you high. But it's still psychoactive, meaning it alters your mental state, typically leaving you feeling more calm and mellow. The feeling of being high comes from the main active component in marijuana, THC. Typically found in much greater quantities than CBD, THC can have a powerful psychoactive effect. To see what that means in practice, let's follow it as it enters the human body. You take in a deep breath of that joint and let the smoke fill your lungs. In this example, you're going to be our test subject, and you will be smoking weed. Smoking is one of the most direct and quickest ways to get high. This is because the smoke from your burning marijuana contains high levels of THC. The smoke is then inhaled, filling your lungs. At this point, you might experience some irritation, manifesting in the iconic smoker's cough from introducing an alien substance into your lungs. This, however, is not unique to smoking weed, as you're likely to see the same from people smoking or vaping conventional tobacco. The lungs are designed to quickly and efficiently transfer oxygen into the bloodstream when we breathe. Therefore, they have the capacity to take in large quantities of gas in one breath and get any number of elements or compounds from that gas into our bloodstream, and fast. The lungs aren't just empty chambers, they're full of tiny little air pockets called alveoli. The average human adult has roughly 480 million alveoli in their lungs, constituting about 1,500 miles of airways. That's the equivalent of driving from Miami to New Hampshire for our American viewers, or Madrid to Copenhagen for our European viewers. For everyone else, it's roughly 13,636,363.6 bananas lying end to end. Anyway, back to your lungs. In each alveolus, the THC from the smoke is transferred directly into your bloodstream, which then carries it all over your body, including to the critical area, your brain. As a result, it often only takes a matter of seconds for the user to start feeling the psychoactive effects of what they're smoking. So, let's crack your head open and see what's going on inside. Sorry, this might hurt a little. The THC and CBD bind themselves to receptors throughout your brain. The amygdala, for example, is responsible for anxiety, emotional responses, and fear. CBD dulls the activity in this part of the brain, but the THC component can stimulate it. While many users feel calmer after having smoked weed, others can feel a heightened sense of paranoia and worry, particularly on the come down as the calming effects of the CBD wear off. Looking at other parts of the brain impacted by the CBD, we have the basal ganglia, which is involved with motor control and planning, the neocortex, which processes sensory information, and the cerebellum, which is the center of motor control. All three of these areas are impacted by smoking weed, resulting in you feeling slower in general. Reflexes are delayed, information takes more time to process, and motor functions and speech slow down. Driving under the influence of marijuana can be very dangerous as a result. One study in the UK found that fatal accidents are 1.65 times more likely to occur when the subject is under the influence of marijuana, while another study in Canada found that accidents could be 2 to 4 times as likely. Most countries have strict laws for driving under the influence of weed, with zero-tolerance policies, made stricter by the fact that it can take over 48 hours for weed to stop showing up on a blood test. If they're testing your saliva, it can be up to 72 hours. Urine can be anywhere from 3 to 30 days, and it can even be tested in your hair follicles for up to 90 days. Fortunately, you won't find many traffic cops that are plucking out your arm hair for a routine traffic stop. However, it would be reductive to think that all weed does is dull your brain. THC is a very active component that stimulates a lot of neural activity. Colors look brighter, sounds are louder, music sounds more rich and layered. Food often tastes better under the influence of THC, giving the subject the illusion that they're really hungry. That's right, this is why so many people using cannabis experience the famous munchies, which is why having a stoner visit your home is potentially extremely dangerous to the state of your snack pantry and chip supply. Many people report having heightened imagination, being able to think outside the box or come up with fresh and exciting ideas. Artists all throughout history have partaken in recreational drugs in an attempt to broaden their horizons, dulling a lot of the negative sensations, such as feeling pain and anxiety, coupled with the stimulation from THC, results in feelings of euphoria. In short, you, our human test subject, have gotten high. But what does this high actually look like? Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's bandage your head up and take a look. So far, we've only focused on the THC and CBD, but there are hundreds of active components within cannabis, which vary in quantity and intensity depending on which of the hundreds of strains the user is consuming. On top of that, there's the method of consumption. While smoking or vaping gets the chemicals into the bloodstream quickly, the high only lasts around 3 hours or so. Many users instead take gummies or bake brownies and cookies. When weed is absorbed through the digestive system, it takes a significantly longer time to kick in, but when it does, the user can experience highs that go on for hours, even up to a day, as the digestive system slowly releases the chemicals into the bloodstream. All of this makes studying the effects of marijuana very difficult. As with almost any study, there are the caveats of which strain is being used, how the test subject is ingesting it, and who the test subject is. The human brain is an incredibly complex thing indeed. If you took a sample of the human brain that was the size of just 1 grain of sand, that sample would contain 100,000 neurons and 1 billion synapses. Now multiply that by 860,000 and you've got a human brain, just like the one that's sitting in your head, watching this video and feeling very smug about itself. Being able to quantify and measure exactly what's happening in an organ far more advanced and complicated than the computers we're studying it on has been a challenge in medical science for decades and will likely continue to be one for a very long time. While one individual might take 1 puff and spend the rest of the day feeling anxious, their elderly grandma might smoke a whole bowl and feel nothing but zen. So, for Nana's sake, is it dangerous? Well, on the whole, consuming marijuana is relatively harmless as long as you aren't driving, controlling heavy machinery, or performing open-heart surgery. The risks of smoking the occasional joint with the right amount of weed in it are low. So, why hasn't it been legalized worldwide already? And why are there skeptics out there, including in the scientific community? As is often the case with controversial topics, a lot of the conflict comes from political and cultural differences. To tell that whole story, we need to wind all the way back to China in 2800 BC, where we find the first recorded use of marijuana in history. Even that long ago, the cannabis plant was being used for medicinal purposes. Emperor Shen Nong, considered by many to be the grandfather of medicine, recorded the plant in his writings as being particularly useful. From that point, records of cannabis spread throughout India, Syria, Greece, and Rome. Various healing properties have been ascribed to it over the years, including cures for inflammation, depression, arthritis, and even asthma. Of course, most early medicine is notoriously rather unreliable. We're looking at you, leeches and milk transfusions. But there's always been something about this little green plant that's captured the attention of doctors and pharmacologists throughout the centuries. Often there's a grain of truth to the mythology that has sprung up around the drug. In Hinduism, for example, the god Shiva is given the title of Lord of Bhang because cannabis is his favorite food. For centuries, many Hindus believed that if you were suffering from a fever, it was the god's hot breath of anger upon you. Rituals were conducted where you would be given a quantity of cannabis to consume, so you would find favor with Shiva again, and your fever would pass. With modern medical science, we know that THC acts in the hypothalamus of the brain, reducing the body's temperature and therefore counteracting fevers. So, where did it all go wrong for weed's PR team? Why is it that many people in the West now include cannabis in the same conversation as crack, cocaine, and heroin, as opposed to paracetamol and penicillin? Well, medical marijuana was first introduced in the West in 1841 by William Brooke O'Shaughnessy, an Irish physician who spent years studying all kinds of different medicines in India. But the real origins of the USA's problem with marijuana began 200 years before that, in the Jamestown colony in 1605. Dissatisfied with the return on investment they were seeing, the English, and King James I in particular, demanded the colony change up the crop they produced to hemp, a plant within the cannabis family. The crop was a massive success and became the key to the early expansion of the American colonial settlements. George Washington himself famously grew hemp as one of his 3 primary crops on Mount Vernon. The plant was used to manufacture ropes and fabrics, but following William Brooke O'Shaughnessy's findings from India, Americans began to experiment with the plant's medicinal properties. The USA was still in relative infancy, with many laws and prohibitions being established. Drug laws at the time involved labeling products as being poisons, which restricted them to being legal only if prescribed by a pharmacist. Even then, the debate about cannabis varied from state to state, with some issuing it with the poison status and others believing it was exempt from these rules. At the time, opium dens were rife across America, and alongside them a number of hashish parlors popped up in which people would smoke various forms of hemp and cannabis. By 1880, these establishments were seen as quite fashionable, with many of the upper classes frequenting them. It's estimated that there were roughly 500 such parlors in New York City alone. The laws needed to be strengthened further still. Fraud and corruption were rife in the drug industry, with many falsely labeling their products for the sake of profit. The tighter that these restrictions got, the more people looked for loopholes. The government and the newly established Food and Drug Administration were pulling in different directions than a lot of the American public, who were looking to skirt prescriptions and drug laws in order to continue to get their highs. In the move to close the loopholes, cannabis was often grouped in with many of the much more addictive, much more harmful drugs that were plaguing the American population. The solution the American government came to was a zero-tolerance policy on recreational drug use, including the prohibition of alcohol and the criminalization of marijuana, which at the time they were spelling with an H. In 1971, President Nixon coined the term war on drugs, where he declared drug abuse to be public enemy number 1 of the American people. The approach was incarceration with an iron fist. Possession, distribution, and consumption of banned substances would result in jail time. It's estimated that throughout this war on drugs, the USA spends roughly $51 billion annually on its endeavor to clean up the streets. To illustrate, with that money, the USA could give each Canadian citizen $1,416.67 per year just as a little thank you for being such lovely neighbors. Alternatively, they could give one lucky Canadian $1 a minute for 97,032 years. A large amount of this campaign against drugs has involved a level of fear-mongering. There's a lot of false information swirling around the world about the negative effects these drugs have. It rots the brain and causes psychosis. It's a gateway drug to stronger and more dangerous highs, and it is highly addictive. But is there any truth to any of these claims? Let's examine them one by one. Firstly, no, marijuana does not rot the brain. Rotting is the decay of dead organic material as bacteria and fungi consume it. That simply doesn't happen. However, the link to psychosis is a much more contested field, with evidence for both sides of the argument. Firstly, what is psychosis? It's a term that is thrown around a lot, especially in the world of drug use, but very rarely defined, meaning a lot of people attach their own fears, worries, and prejudices to the word. Psychosis is when someone loses contact with reality. The image of the world around them that the brain is painting doesn't match up with the objective reality surrounding them. The two main symptoms of psychosis are hallucinations and delusions, and it's important to know the difference between the two. A hallucination is when a person experiences something that isn't actually happening. Most commonly, this takes the form of hearing voices that aren't really there, or sometimes seeing things that aren't really there. In some cases, people have reported smelling, feeling, and tasting their hallucinations too, such as tasting blood in their mouth despite there being none. A delusion, on the other hand, is more abstract. It could be the feeling that you're being followed, or that there's a conspiracy in your workplace to harm you. Delusional people are often highly susceptible to conspiracy theories, as often the paranoid messaging chimes with their fearful delusions that their minds have already been generating. So, does marijuana cause psychosis? It's complicated. Let's go back to the chemicals active in your brain. We're gonna need to crack that skull open again, sorry. THC is highly psychoactive. This is where the feeling of euphoria from being high comes from. While CBD can decrease the levels of panic and paranoia in the brain, it's often present in much smaller quantities than THC, mainly as many cannabis farms compete with one another to grow stronger and stronger strains. Couple that with the fact that there are hundreds of active compounds within the cannabis plant, and it goes back to our earlier point about this being a challenging area of study. Therefore, many scientists rely on quite broad studies, taking large sample sizes of drug users and non-drug users and comparing the development of their brains over time, looking most notably at teenagers and young people. What they found is there is often a link between heavy pot smoking and psychosis. There are cases of people living with schizophrenia and bipolar disorders where the heavy use of marijuana is linked to the onset of those symptoms. What has not been proven, however, is that weed was the cause. Most scientists believe that weed can, in some cases, accelerate the development of underlying psychotic disorders. The brain is a very complex and delicate thing. If somebody has an underlying psychotic condition, then the consumption of drugs that alters their state of mind and heightens activities within certain sections of the brain can naturally lead to an exacerbation of those symptoms. Schizophrenia is believed to affect 1 in 300 people, while bipolar disorder affects 1 in 100. While these are quite small percentages, they are not insignificant. THC does carry the risk of triggering a psychotic episode if you're genetically predisposed to having a psychotic condition. The chances are very low and won't affect the majority of the population, but they are still there. Next, is it a gateway drug? The experience of a chemical buzz in the brain is a sensation that many of us try to chase in our lives. You get up and sing in a concert at your high school and you get a rush from it. You do it a second time and the high is worn off a bit. So you need a bigger crowd, and suddenly you're in a rock band on an arena tour. Chasing this type of bigger, better high is an experience we're sure many of you are familiar with. Studies have shown that in a minority of cases, the same can happen with marijuana. Usage of the drug can prime the brain, ready for more intense highs, which it then craves. This sounds bad until you realize the same thing happens with cigarettes and alcohol. Both of these demonstrate a similar connection to being a gateway drug to harder substances as marijuana. So, why are those not held up to the same level of scrutiny? One thing studies have shown is that there is a much more powerful gateway drug out there: trauma. A difficult childhood, experiencing abuse, and going through acute pain and suffering are all far more likely to result in a person developing a dependence on hard substances. Weed is often a part of that journey, but in these cases it seems to be a symptom more than the cause of the problem. But is it addictive? Let's take a similar look at this question. You wake up one morning feeling tired, so you make yourself a cup of coffee. It clears away the fog, helps you focus on your job, and gives you a little endorphin rush from a good day's work. So the next day, you do the same, and the next, until one day you run out of coffee. You look in the jar and it's empty. A storm cloud gathers over your head. You go to work with a scowl, snap at your coworkers, have a headache by lunchtime, and come home feeling miserable. What's happened here? Well, the human brain is incredibly flexible. Your brain has gotten so used to the influx of caffeine each day that it's now rebalanced the chemicals inside itself to receive that caffeine boost. It's ready and it's waiting, so when the boost doesn't come, there's now a chemical imbalance. The same thing happens with weed. If you burn one down at 420, smoke weed every day, your brain's going to be sitting there at 419 rubbing its metaphorical hands together in anticipation. Coming off weed now feels hard. You have cravings for it, you feel irritated when you don't have it, you struggle to fall asleep, you lose your appetite, and you generally have a bad time. For about 2 weeks. Then you're likely back to normal. That's because what we've described here isn't an addiction, it's dependence. It's very common and can be broken fairly quickly. Up to 30% of weed smokers experience some level of dependence, and it can be overcome by just taking an extended break and giving your brain some rest. That said, there's a small risk of long-term addiction. People under the age of 18 have brains that are still developing. They're still growing and changing and adjusting to the world around them. Smoking weed regularly at this stage in your life could lead your brain to building itself around the expectation that it'll be receiving those chemical hits every day, which may start as a dependence and could grow to be much more deeply rooted and could result in a lifelong addiction. If there's one thing you learned from this video, it's that marijuana, much like life, is complicated. There may not always be a straight answer to every question. Anyone who tells you that something is totally amazing and has no downsides will always be lying. Even ice cream has downsides. What's important is looking at the big picture. Is weed the devil's leaf that spells the end of society as we know it? No, of course not. But neither is it a miracle cure-all drug that everyone should take on a daily basis. Can smoking the devil's lettuce every day for a month be bad for you? What happens to your body exactly? Or more importantly, what happens to your mind? And what if you suddenly quit? Will you pay for your month of indulgence with nasty withdrawal? Humanity has come a long way where weed is concerned. It's now legal for recreational use in 25 states, plus 3 territories and Washington, D.C. A further 7 states in the U.S. have decriminalized it, meaning it's not legal, but you won't be prosecuted for taking it. This trend toward general acceptance seems to align with the general public's opinion. Surveys show that 88% of Americans think it should be legal for recreational and medical use. The world is changing. Seems like it won't be long until weed is legal or decriminalized in many more countries. That's because word's on the street that weed isn't half as bad as those Puritans from the past made it out to be. Even some of the strictest nations where drugs are concerned have done an about-turn on weed. We imagine a few of our viewers have been to Thailand in the last year and seen what has been nothing short of a weed explosion. And this is a country that not long ago could have you put behind some very nasty-looking bars for having a few grams of weed on your person. Entire streets these days in the tourist areas look like a fantasy dream of deceased Bob Marley. Weed shops are everywhere. Feels like walking through a weed wonderland. The BBC called it just that, interviewing a guy who said the country is now Amsterdam on steroids. But despite it being a veritable cash cow, there have been people, including doctors, calling for a re-ban. The government doesn't look like it'll change its stance. Surely, if this is happening in conservative Thailand, weed can't be that bad for you. That's what we'll try to figure out in this video. Let's start day 1 by exploring some myths about this once demonized drug. One theory states that weed can make you mad, mad as in the angry type of mad, and maybe even on your first day of smoking, making it extremely relevant for our 30-day journey. There have already been news articles in Thailand saying someone viciously attacked someone else and the now legal weed was blamed. Some of those stories reminded people of long-gone era where misinformation about drugs came out of almost every politician's mouth. In the past, we humans absolutely got weed, aka ganja, pot, grass, herb, all wrong. You only need to look at anti-weed propaganda films like 1937's Reefer Madness, which told us that weed had its roots in hell. And if it doesn't turn you into a killer or compel you to sleep with the first person you see walking down the street, it'll render you in a state of hopeless insanity. Here's a line from a doctor in the movie explaining what happened to some kid who got himself addicted to weed. Yes, I remember, just a young boy under the influence of the drug. He killed his entire family with an axe. This line is the definition of nonsense. You don't even need the numerous scientific studies to tell you weed doesn't usually make people violent. Unlike the very legal alcohol. As the American comedian Bill Hicks once joked, pot is a better drug than alcohol, I'll prove it to you. You're at a ball game or a concert and someone's really violent and aggressive and obnoxious. Are they drunk or are they smoking pot? That's hardly scientific, it's just an observation, but the people of the world would very likely agree the answer is without a doubt alcohol. With weed, there have been some studies that have suggested it could cause antisocial behavior. One such study published by the National Institutes of Health told us a meta-analysis found the risk of perpetrating violence was more than twice as high for young adults who used marijuana. Another piece of nonsense we like is when President Ronald Reagan during his war on drugs days said, "I now have absolute proof that smoking even one marijuana cigarette is equal in brain damage to being on Bikini Island during an H-bomb blast." He was speaking absolute balderdash, but that doesn't mean weed is completely safe where the well-being of your body or your mind is concerned. No drugs are 100% safe. Before we get into the effects of weed smoking after day 1, there's something we need to tell you about weed in general. The fact that it just isn't for everyone. And we mean that some people might have a very bad reaction the first time they take it, especially if they do as many impressionable teenagers do and get blasted before they've checked if they have a vehicle, aka a brain, suitable for space travel. You need to know that weed is a psychoactive drug. It affects your nervous system. It can alter how you think, what you see, and what you hear. It gets you high. How high is up to your tolerance, if you have a tolerance, and your unique body, and of course what kind of weed you've been smoking. It's well known that weed today is often about 10 times stronger than weed from half a century ago. Some people seem very sensitive to weed, and being high can almost be like tripping on psychedelics. Not always very pleasant, yet others might feel a sense of well-being, but not be all that out there. We all react differently. Start slow is our advice. There are 483 known compounds in weed, but the ones most talked about are tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, the one that's mainly responsible for the high, and cannabidiol, CBD, the one that's presently being sold as a possible antidote to anxiety and depression or a cure for pain and various diseases. We'll get back to that topic soon. Weed might not be for you at all, and we mean for some people, there's just too big of a risk. There is evidence that it can cause psychotic experiences, especially if you've had them before or they run in your family. It's rare, but be aware. There are plenty of scientific papers that tell us cannabis is a known risk factor for schizophrenia. Still, according to one such paper published by the National Institutes of Health, biological events and a valid model of neurobiological mechanisms are lacking. That means they weren't able to figure out what was going on in the brain when something went wrong. They couldn't find the actual cause. Nonetheless, it is well established that people on weed may become deluded, paranoid. If you smoke weed and you begin to think that all your friends are CIA agents who are trying to control your mind with a 21st century version of MK Ultra, you might be one of those people who should stay away from weed. We don't think the CIA does such things anymore. For some, the craziness is fleeting. They might find it after a particularly large dose, but they tell their friends, "Look, my thumbs have gone weird. My heart is beating like a bleeped up clock." That's from an old cult classic comedy movie with some really funny weed parts. It's a film, but the writer obviously had experience with the drug in question. Put your hand up if you've ever sneakily felt your heartbeat on weed because you imagine something ain't right. It can cause anxiety, and with some people, severe anxiety, leading to outlandish thoughts about something that's gone wrong with their body. Again, we know some of you are now nodding your head. Studies have shown long-term use of weed may increase the risk of heart issues, but it doesn't cause your heart to beat fast enough that it fails after just one smoke. That's the anxiety talking. Others say weed makes them feel disconnected from themselves, disassociative. They may hallucinate or just have some really disturbing, otherworldly thoughts. And we're not trying to scare you, but this stuff you ought to know. It's hard to understand how many people in a population will have a negative weed experience. In a Danish study consisting of thousands of people, the researchers said 30% of participants who'd had a psychotic experience in their lives would likely not have had one had they not ever ingested weed. Still, many people will not have such negative psychological reactions, especially when they take it in small amounts. Millions will consume it every day and they're A-OK. A World Drug Report in 2013 said 180 million people had tried weed in the last year. It's thought that there are about 219 million weed smokers on the planet right now. The CDC says about 11.5% of Americans smoke it or did so in 2021. In England and Wales, a study said 13.5% of 16 to 24-year-olds had it in the past year. 40% of those people said they'd used it at least once a month. Most of them would have been fine, but some of them would have had negative experiences. Another study we found said people who smoke weed are 3 times more likely to believe people will harm them than people who don't smoke weed. Then there was that study that tested people with an intravenous 1.5 milligram dose of either THC or a placebo, meaning nothing. The researchers found that the weed consumers were 30% more likely to have some amount of paranoia. Other negative experiences included lowered mood, worry, anxiety, and negative thoughts about themselves. So with all that in mind, you should start slowly with weed and see how it goes. Let's say you like it and you want to smoke it again. Day 1 of weed is over, it's now day 2. You may have noticed some forgetfulness, especially around the time you smoked the weed yesterday. Unlike those times you were wasted on alcohol, you haven't woken up in a strange bed with a penis scrawled on your cheek, but your memory is a bit fuzzy from around the time you smoked. There's a reason for that. Cannabis affects something called the hippocampus. It's a part of the brain that helps you process new memories. Studies on rats that were given regular doses of weed showed they struggled to remember how to do various tasks. There was even long-term impairment, but these rats were stoned throughout their entire young lives. You're not a rat, and you haven't been smoking weed for years on end, but this is something to bear in mind. Studies have shown that regular weed use in young people can affect how the hippocampus develops. But such cognitive impairment, like many things related to weed, needs to be studied more. Your month on weed almost certainly isn't going to change the structure of your brain in any significant way for the rest of your life. You may have had some short-term memory problems when you got stoned again today, but you don't need to sweat the long-term stuff yet. In fact, some studies have shown regular weed use may stave off neurodegenerative diseases that affect memory, like Alzheimer's and Huntington's chorea. Let's say you've now been hitting the weed for 5 days on the trot. Sure, you have some patchy memory days, but in general, since you're the kind of person who likes weed and has positive experiences with it, you actually feel fine. You haven't really experienced any changes. We mean the middle-aged, long-haired guy that's been selling it to you, the one who always is wearing that old Ween t-shirt, says he's been smoking it every day since 1997. He says he's fine. Well, he does seem to have some motivation issues. Many people do, which is why Afro Man wrote the song lyrics, "I was gonna clean my room until I got high. I was gonna get up and find the broom, but then I got high. My room is still messed up, and I know why." Again, that's not scientific, but many people have said such things. We'll come back to that topic of motivation soon. Another thing you noticed is you put on a few pounds. As the rapper Master P said in a song, "You the captain, I'm the crunch, you got that dinner, I got the lunch. Hit the weed, pass the blunt, your eyes red, and you got the munchies." A paper in the journal Nature, again based on stoned rodents, said the THC in weed can cause changes in the brain's hypothalamus, tricking the rat into thinking it's hungry. There's evidence that smoking weed can lead to an increase in the production of the hormone ghrelin, which can create hunger pangs. Not only that, but weed leads to increases in the feel-good chemical dopamine, so the experience of eating that food could feel much more satisfying than normal. If you're a weed smoker, we don't need to tell you this. You've all raided the fridge at 2 a.m. like a ravenous zombie after getting the weed munchies. Still, while you've put on a few pounds, studies have shown that regular weed use does not generally lead to weight gain in the long run. In fact, some studies show pot smokers might have a lower body mass index on average. We should just add here that there are so many studies out there and so many are contradictory that figuring out the mystery of weed is going to take a lot more work. You could literally spend all day Googling all the good stuff about weed and think it was the answer to all the world's problems. Then you could do the opposite and soon become scared out of your wits. It's always best to analyze various studies or at least know they exist. Let's also remember here that people wouldn't do it if it didn't make them feel good. As the book and the movie Trainspotting said about an illegal substance, not weed, but it works for all substances, people think it's all about misery and desperation and death and all that, which is not to be ignored. But what they forget is the pleasure of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. Sticking with the positives, for many people suffering from chronic pain, weed has been a godsend. You yourself may have had neuropathic pain in your back for years, but now you've been smoking weed for a few days and there's been a considerable reversal of pain levels. The reason for this is that a person's peripheral nerves, the nerves that detect pain sensations, contain a lot of receptors for cannabinoids. Scientists now think that cannabinoids might block peripheral nerve pain. Studies have shown this to be true in animals. Still, as you might know, the mind plays a big part when it comes to pain. You may have heard of the nocebo effect, where people feel pain when they shouldn't be feeling pain. A good example is the case of the guy who went to the ER with a long nail stuck through his work boot. He was screaming and telling doctors that even the opiates they were giving him weren't working. When they finally sawed off his boot, they saw the nail had actually gone through the gap between his toes. Embarrassed, the guy was suddenly pain-free. But for him, he really did feel that pain. And with cannabis, there's now good evidence that it can act as a placebo where pain is concerned. Studies have shown that when people with pain took a placebo that looked, smelled, and tasted like weed, they felt a reduction in their pain levels. We've known for decades that when someone takes a placebo for pain, certain neurotransmitters are released in the brain, including what are called endocannabinoids. But there have also been some negative reactions, especially now that you've been smoking it for 10 days. you seem to be less motivated. Studies have shown that after weed consumption, people can indeed be less motivated. One study showed that participants who've had weed were less likely to press buttons for a reward. Still, this study showed that if people waited 12 hours, their motivation returned. Now you've realized that taking a long break from weed smoking is sometimes good. Long-term smokers of weed don't need studies to tell them overdoing it can make them a bit sluggish and not exactly in the mood to get things done as fast as possible. It's the same with reaction times. You've noticed that when you're stoned, you might float like a butterfly, but not exactly sting like a bee. Researchers have said that this might have something to do with the brain's thalamus corticostriatal circuit. The Nature journal tells us that this controls movement execution, habit formation, and reward. Receptors in here bind with the THC, and this can slow down someone's perception of time. In a 2012 study, scientists said 70% of participants who smoked weed experienced what seemed like a stretching of time. Time moved more slowly, and this might have something to do with slowed reaction times. Studies have showed that performance can be affected. These are controversial studies given that people smoke weed and drive cars or operate planes or machinery. One study we found showed that when users had to perform a task after ingesting weed for 4 days, they not only had slower reaction times on the first day of the experiment, it seems that they got used to it. Another study, a meta-study, concluded that some lower-quality studies have reported next-day effects of THC on cognitive function and safety-sensitive tasks. However, most studies, including some higher quality, have found no such effect. But you've been taking it easy, so your reaction time's not much different from usual, certainly after 12 hours from your last smoke. You also seemed much more prone to slowness on the first few days that you did smoke. This seemed to be getting better the more days you smoke. Like most people in the world, the effects seem to completely go away between 2 and 4 hours. But another thing you realized is that after 12 days on this stuff, you started to get more anxious. This is because part of your brain called the amygdala is stimulated by weed. The studies on anxiety and cannabis use can be very contradictory. For some people, weed helped with their anxiety, but for others, they experienced an increase in anxiety after long-term use, although the causal links were not clear. In a 2017 survey consisting of 9,000 American regular weed smokers, 70% said it gave them noticeable health benefits, with almost 50% saying it relieved anxiety. Others said it helped with their PTSD. Some said it had a positive effect on their phobias, and some said it helped with sleep and social anxiety. But others said it caused anxiety, especially when they consumed weed with high levels of THC. It's a bit of an each-to-their-own situation. In your case, the anxiety has only been fleeting, and you only experienced it when you had consumed a lot more weed than usual. It's around this point in your 30-day experience that you notice the effect weed is having on your lungs. This is mostly a silent effect, although admittedly just the other day you coughed up something that made you think of the movie Ghostbusters. Just be aware that chronic weed smoking can increase phlegm production. You've been smoking for quite a while now, and this might have affected the cell linings of the large airways in your body, which has led to coughing up that ball of slime. Still, you don't mix the weed with tobacco as many people in the UK do when they often make those huge baseball bat spliffs in their Rizla-based works of art. The question is smoking weed safe just because you don't mix it with tobacco? A 2021 study showed that 44% of Americans believe that smoking weed every day is better for you than smoking cigarettes every day. Of course, the amount you smoke matters. People generally smoke way more cigarettes than weed joints. Still, smoke from weed is still not great for you. Scientists say it may still cause lung cancer and emphysema. The problem is scientists haven't figured out just how bad weed smoke is for you. Not enough studies have been done, something we've seen 1,000 times while researching the show. One of the studies was conducted at the Ottawa Hospital in Canada. Researchers compared 150 lung scans from weed smokers, tobacco-only smokers, and non-smokers. The research reported that rates of emphysema, meaning an inflammation of the airway, were higher in weed smokers than they were in tobacco smokers. Still, we're talking about 75% compared to 70%. Only 5% of non-smokers had it. As for the big C, the Mayo Clinic says cannabis may cause lung cancer, but there's not enough evidence right now to say it definitely does. Then again, there's also evidence that the compounds in cannabis have, in some instances, been shown to kill certain types of cancer cells, including those found in the breast, lung, prostate, and skin cancers. Again, we must reiterate that there have been some very positive results, but only with some people. So we definitely can't say cannabis, mainly CBD, will help someone beat cancer. One thing it seems to do for scores of people is help with their cancer pain. which is why more and more countries have given it the green light to be used in limited medical instances. On the other hand, you also have the genotoxic effects of oxidized hydrocarbons that occur when you burn cannabis, which has been said to create genetic changes that could potentially lead to a carcinogenic state. A paper published by the National Institutes of Health said weed joints deliver at least 4 times as much tar to the lungs as tobacco cigarettes of equivalent weight, explaining that it's because in these joints there are usually not any filters and people tend to hold the weed smoke in longer. In short, when you compare weed smokers or cigarette smokers with non-smokers, the incidence of respiratory problems is much higher. One study showed it was 1 in 3 compared to 1 in 12, but we still can't say for sure if cannabis causes cancer. In one study, a big one, out of 65,000 people, it seemed marijuana use might have had a negative effect on prostate cancer, but not any other of the major cancers. The participants were aged 15 to 49 only, so more studies looking at older people would have to be done, since cancer is more common in older folks. We're not going to tell you that regularly smoking weed doesn't cause cancer, but we're also not going to tell you it definitely can. What we will say is your month on weed is certainly not the riskiest thing you'll ever do in your life, but you are inhaling smoke, and while it might not be as carcinogenic as some news articles might suggest, it is very possible that this experience is damaging your lungs. As things stand, you now have smoked weed daily for 3 weeks. We don't think there'll be any substantial damage. If you smoked joints every day for years, well, your lungs will suffer. Just how much? We can't say. It gets even more confusing when you read about vaping weed. Vaporizer devices activate cannabinoids, but they don't heat the goodness to the point of combustion. You might read this and think, well, that's great, vape it is then. But then you read vaping articles such as this one from Johns Hopkins Medicine. Emerging data suggests links to chronic lung disease and asthma, as well as associations between dual use of e-cigarettes and smoking with cardiovascular disease. But that same article also said we still don't have a definitive answer as to how bad vaping is for your body. We do know that when you do vape, you also inhale harmful chemicals, and some doctors in the US have said they've seen more and more people coming in to see them with conditions that could very well be related to their vaping habit. You all probably know former smokers who now vape, and they look like steam trains most of the day. Still, no one vapes weed in such high quantities. You've now been smoking weed daily for almost the full month. Will it be hard to quit? Is weed addictive? Yet again, this question is not easy to answer. Not all substance addictions and withdrawals are the same. If you have a physical addiction to alcohol or benzodiazepines like Valium, etc., coming right off after a long time can actually be very dangerous. You might not only have seizures that can and do kill, but in terms of mental well-being, you might think you've been plunged into anxiety hell, and we do mean hell. This is related to the effect these drugs have on your GABA receptors. In layman's terms, if a substance makes you very relaxed, your brain might stop creating chemicals that usually make you chilled, so when you stop, the very opposite of relaxed happens to you. It's the same for people who stop taking opiates and become incredibly restless and depressed. But what about weed? Does that kick the poop out of you when your body no longer has it? Actually, with cannabis withdrawal, you're definitely not going to experience anything like we just mentioned, but there is something called marijuana use disorder. People have been known to become dependent on weed. Their body craves the psychological changes that weed's been giving to them. They can develop a tolerance, so they need more and more. Still, it's said only 10 to 20% of daily weed users will develop dependence. There will be some mild withdrawal symptoms when they stop, maybe lasting about 2 weeks. These might include cravings, irritability, decreased appetite, mood and sleep difficulties, restlessness, and other kinds of physical discomfort. A paper in the National Institutes of Drug Abuse in the U.S. stated, in 2015, about 4 million people in the United States met the diagnostic criteria for a marijuana use disorder. 138,000 voluntarily sought treatment for their marijuana use. With any psychoactive substance, there's no clear line you can cross as to how long and how much you can actually consume before developing dependency. Everyone is different. There are cases of people smoking weed for years and having zero problem stopping, or maybe just mild issues. Then you have people who smoked for shorter periods who feel pretty bad after stopping. But on the whole, in terms of withdrawal symptoms, weed is far, far less dangerous than many substances we use to change the way we feel. Weed withdrawal is a gazillion times safer than if you were a regular consumer of things like Xanax, Percocet, or Johnny Walker. Still, you should be aware that becoming dependent on weed is possible. Studies show that this is a disproportionately bigger problem for younger people. Okay, so your month is up. And to be honest, since you've taken your weed sensibly, you feel fine. You are aware of all the psychological dangers some people face with weed consumption, but it seems that for now you're not one of those people who react badly to it. That said, if you keep this up, there's a very real possibility you'll damage your lungs, and there's also a real possibility you'll develop a dependence. Still, since you feel better, you're sleeping well, you have less social anxiety, and your work hasn't been negatively affected, you think you'll carry on. Although just to be safe, you're going to limit your smoking to small doses just a few times a week. Many people don't even know why they smoke weed. They might tell you, the reasons? There are no reasons. Who needs reasons when you've got weed? One person interviewed in The Guardian felt that way for 40+ years. She got to the point that she didn't even know if she enjoyed it anymore. She said in an interview, "I smoked to go to work, smoked to do the washing up, smoked for chill time." In the end, she said her lungs started to hurt and her gums regularly bled. She didn't know why she wanted it, but she craved it when she didn't have it. One day she realized she'd gone 2 days without weed and then just thought, okay, enough's enough. She craved it for sure, but with the help of meetings and counseling, she stopped completely. And guess what? She started dreaming again. That's something you noticed when you smoked for a month. You didn't dream. Many people don't regularly smoke weed because it interrupts the amount of time people spend in rapid eye movement or REM sleep, the time when most people dream. Dreaming was one of the big changes for her, but everyone is different where cannabis withdrawal is concerned. These are some comments made by people who quit after many years of daily smoking. "I just quit after 10 years as well. Just cold turkeyed it, no withdrawal symptoms. The withdrawals have not been fun. I've lost 4 pounds in 2 days because it's really hard to eat. Mentally, I feel really clear and happy. My boyfriend stopped smoking weed like 2-3 months ago, and I'm noticing that his behavior is different. He's more angry and not as sweet as he used to be." And this one. "I quit after about 6 years of smoking every day. It made me anxious and awkward in social situations. I would overanalyze things and think really weird or delusional thoughts. Forget about talking to girls, I couldn't handle it. Since I quit, all these things went away. As it said on the walls of the Temple of Apollo in ancient Greece, know thyself. With weed, you have to educate yourself and assess if it's good for your mental health while adding up the pros and cons as to how it'll affect your body and life in general. If you absolutely want to experience weed, we suggest wading in slowly rather than diving straight into the deep. It can be a mysterious ocean out there, and you never know what you might find. As we've told you many times today, scientists haven't yet plumbed the depths of all of Mary Jane, not entirely. Today we're diving into a hot topic in the world of cannabis: smoking weed versus eating it. We've all heard about those methods, but what exactly sets them apart? From how quickly they hit you to their effects on the body, there's a lot to unpack. As we delve deeper into the topic, it's important to understand that the way our bodies process cannabis can significantly alter our experiences with it. Smoking and eating weed aren't just different in terms of consumption methods, they engage with our biology in distinct ways. Whether you're a seasoned smoker or just cannabis curious, knowing these differences is key to making informed choices about your consumption. First, meet Sarah. Sarah's in her late 20s and works as a graphic designer in a bustling city. She's always been open-minded and curious about different experiences, including the world of cannabis. Sarah's exposure to weed has primarily been through social gatherings and occasional use, but her experiences have been limited to smoking, usually sparking a joint or hitting a bong. Lately, she's been hearing a lot about edibles from her friends and a few online forums, so she's intrigued. Sarah's journey into exploring the differences between smoking and eating cannabis begins with a visit to a local dispensary. When Sarah visits the local dispensary for the first time, she's both excited and a bit overwhelmed. The dispensary, with its wide variety of products and knowledgeable staff, offers a welcoming atmosphere for both newcomers and experienced users. Sarah takes her time to talk with the bud tenders who are eager to educate her about the different strains, THC and CBD content, and the effects of various products. They emphasize the importance of starting with low doses, especially with the edibles, and suggest trying a few different strains to understand which works best for her needs. Determining the quality of the dispensary is easy for Sarah. The clean, well-organized space, clear labeling, and transparency about product sourcing and testing give her confidence in her choices. She appreciates the dispensary's commitment to customer education and safety, which is evident in their detailed product descriptions and willingness to answer all of her questions. This visit not only provides Sarah with the products she's curious about, but also arms her with the knowledge and understanding necessary for a responsible and enjoyable cannabis experience. Sarah is still a bit apprehensive, but she's excited to learn more. Throughout our video, we'll check in on Sarah at key moments of her exploration. She'll be our guide through the real-world application of the facts we discuss, So let's tag along with Sarah as she embarks on this enlightening journey into the diverse world of cannabis consumption. Let's dive right into the speed and duration of the effects you experience. When you light up a joint and inhale, the sensation of calmness or bliss washes over you almost instantaneously, typically hitting within a few short minutes. The rapid onset of effects while smoking cannabis is a result of the efficient route THC takes from the lungs to the bloodstream. When you inhale cannabis smoke, the THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, the primary psychoactive compound in marijuana, is immediately absorbed by the alveoli in the lungs. The alveoli, tiny air sacs in the lungs, have a vast network of blood vessels or capillaries which are extremely efficient at absorbing oxygen, and in this case, THC, into the blood. Once the THC enters these capillaries, it quickly travels through the bloodstream and reaches the brain within seconds to minutes. The swift journey from the lungs to the brain is what leads to the almost immediate onset of effects when smoking cannabis. The blood-brain barrier, a protective layer around the brain's blood vessels, is easily penetrated by THC due to its lipid-soluble nature. Upon crossing the barrier, THC interacts with the endocannabinoid system in the brain, particularly binding to cannabinoid receptors, which results in the psychoactive effects commonly associated with cannabis use, such as euphoria, relaxation, altered sensory perception, and in some cases increased appetite. On the flip side, when you opt for edibles, patience is key. The journey from ingestion to feeling the effects is considerably longer, ranging from about 30 minutes to even a couple hours. This delay happens because the THC has to navigate through your entire digestive system, getting processed along the way before finally entering your bloodstream. But once the effects of edibles do start to surface, they come with a robust intensity and longevity that far surpasses smoking. Edibles are known for their sustained and powerful high, often lingering for several hours, providing a prolonged experience that can vary significantly in intensity and duration compared to smoking. In Sarah's first experiment, she decides to start with what she knows, smoking weed. She opts for a joint, as she's already familiar with the almost immediate effects that come with a few puffs. As she inhales, the THC travels directly to her bloodstream through her lungs, and within minutes she feels the familiar wave of relaxation and euphoria. This quick onset of effects is typical of smoking cannabis, as several studies have shown. It's a direct route to the bloodstream, ensuring the effects are felt rapidly. However, Sarah is curious about how this contrasts with edibles. A week later, she tries a THC-infused brownie. Remembering advice from the dispensary, she starts with a small dose. Unlike smoking, she doesn't feel the effects immediately. It takes about an hour and a half before she starts noticing a change, a delay caused by the THC needing to pass through her digestive system and then get metabolized in her liver. This slow onset is something many first-time edible users aren't prepared for, often leading to the common mistake of consuming too much too soon. What Sarah also notices is the difference in intensity. The high from edibles feels stronger and more body-oriented. This is due to the THC being converted to 11-hydroxy-THC in the liver, a metabolite that's more potent and has longer-lasting effects on the brain. This transformation is what often makes the experience of eating an edible more intense and prolonged compared to smoking. The duration of the high from edibles surprises Sarah. While the effects of smoking usually taper off after a couple hours, for her, the brownie keeps her in a prolonged state of relaxation and altered sensory perception for several hours. The difference in duration also impacts Sarah's day. After smoking, she's able to continue with her regular activities once the effects wear off. But with the edible, she finds herself needing to clear her schedule for the rest of the day, as the intensity and duration of the high are more than she anticipated. There are three main takeaways from Sarah's first edible experiment. One is to start low and go slow, the golden rule of edibles. Starting with a small dose, about 5 to 10 milligrams of THC, is key. Sarah now understands that the effects of edibles can sneak up on you, and overdoing it is easier than one might think. So she patiently waits for at least 2 hours to fully feel the effects before even considering taking more. This approach not only helps her avoid an uncomfortably intense high, but also allows her to understand how her body reacts to different dosages. Another key tip Sarah picks up is the importance of not consuming edibles on an empty stomach. Before indulging in her THC-infused treat, she makes sure to eat a balanced meal. She learns that having food in her stomach, especially healthy fats, can aid in the more gradual absorption of THC, leading to a smoother experience with fewer spikes in intensity. This approach helps mitigate the potential of an overly intense high and aids in stabilizing the effects over a longer period. Sarah finds that eating a meal before she takes her edible not only enhances her overall experience, but also helps her in maintaining her comfort and well-being throughout the high. Sarah also realizes the setting and the environment are key when trying edibles for the first time. She chooses a comfortable, familiar place where she feels safe and relaxed. She makes sure she doesn't have any pressing tasks or responsibilities for the next few hours, as she's seen firsthand that the effects of edibles can last much longer than smoking. Sarah also keeps herself hydrated and has some snacks on hand just in case she needs them. By creating a calm and controlled environment, she ensures her first experience with edibles is as pleasant and stress-free as possible. When it comes to managing the intensity and dosage of cannabis, the approach varies significantly between smoking and consuming edibles. For smoking, the control over dosage is much more straightforward. The immediate onset of the effects when THC is inhaled allows users to gauge how much they've consumed quite quickly. Typically, a standard dose for smoking might be a few puffs for a casual user, with each puff delivering a relatively known quantity of THC. This immediate feedback loop enables users to stop at the point where they feel comfortable, minimizing their risk of overconsumption. When defining a standard dose for smoking marijuana, the quantity of THC in each puff can vary based on the device or method used. So let's look at a few examples. First, let's examine the joint, or a marijuana cigarette. A common choice for consuming cannabis, a joint typically contains about 0.3 to 0.5 grams of cannabis. For a casual user, a standard dose might be 1 or 2 puffs from a joint. Considering that an average joint has a THC concentration of around 10 to 20%, each puff could deliver a variable amount of THC, but it's generally a small and manageable dose for most users. Next, let's look at a pipe. Pipes offer a bit more control over the dosage, as users can load in a smaller amount of marijuana, typically around 0.2 to 0.3 grams per bowl. Each inhalation from a pipe can be considered a dose, with the THC content depending on the strain and the quality of the marijuana. What about those much talked about bong rips? Bongs are known for their ability to cool and filter smoke, providing a smoother experience. A single hit from a bong can be quite potent, as the chamber allows for a larger volume of smoke to be inhaled. For the casual user, one hit from a bong could be enough, especially if the marijuana used has a high THC content. Next, there's the vaporizer, not to be confused with a vape or an e-cigarette. Vaporizing cannabis is seen as a more efficient method of inhalation. Vaporizers work in a similar way to an oven, heating up the cannabis to just below burning temperature, but enough for cannabinoids to be released. This process is much healthier than burning and inhaling cannabis, as it reduces the amount of harmful byproducts you inhale. The dosage from a vaporizer can be more precise, as many devices allow for temperature control and metered dosing. A few inhalations from a vaporizer can be enough to deliver a standard dose, with each puff delivering a consistent amount of THC. With all that said, it's also important to note that the individual tolerance, the strain of marijuana, and the THC concentration massively influences how much THC is delivered with each method. New users should always start with a small amount and wait to understand how they react before consuming more. Now let's talk about edibles. These products present a wildly different challenge in dosage control. The effects of edibles are not immediately felt, since the THC must first pass through the digestive system. This delay can often lead to inadvertent overconsumption, as users might consume more thinking the initial dose wasn't enough. Standard dosages for edibles usually starts at 5 to 10 milligrams of THC. This is considered a low dose. Remember, when THC is ingested, it undergoes a transformation in the liver, converting to 11-hydroxy-THC, a compound that's more potent and crosses the blood-brain barrier more efficiently than THC, so don't be tricked by edibles that seem to have a lower THC content. The potency and prolonged effects of edibles can be attributed to both the conversion process in the liver and the sustained release of the THC into the bloodstream during digestion. It's crucial for users, especially those new to edibles, to adhere to that start low and go slow mantra Sarah learned from her pot brownie. Understanding those nuances in dosage and the body's metabolic response is key to a safe and enjoyable cannabis experience, whether you continue to smoke it or consume it in edible form. As Sarah continues her exploration, she becomes more aware of the challenges in controlling the dosage with edibles. She recalls how easy it was to take one hit at a time when smoking, gauging how she felt before deciding whether to continue. However, with edibles, Sarah quickly realizes it's a different ballgame. After her first experience with a longer-lasting high, she understands why dosage control with edibles is more complicated. The delayed onset of effects with edibles means it's easy to consume too much before the initial dose takes effect. In her next experiment with edibles, Sarah decides to be more cautious. She cuts a small piece of a cannabis-infused cookie, mindful of the recommended dosage. She waits for 2 hours, resisting the urge to consume more. and finds that the smaller dose is more manageable and enjoyable. This practice of patience is crucial with edibles to avoid the discomfort of overconsumption. This approach leads Sarah to a better understanding of how different factors can influence the effects of edibles. She learns factors like her metabolic rate, the last time she ate, and even her body chemistry can affect how quickly and intensely she feels the effects of edibles. These variables make dosing with edibles less predictable compared to smoking, where the effects are more uniform and consistent. Now let's not forget about the health side of things. Smoking weed, like smoking anything, can irritate your lungs and throat. In the long term, this could lead to some respiratory issues, but edibles don't have this problem since there's no smoke involved. However, they do come with their own set of risks, like the chance of overconsumption we mentioned earlier. As Sarah delves deeper into her cannabis exploration, she becomes increasingly mindful of the health implications associated with different methods of consumption. Her experiences with smoking weed, while enjoyable, raise concerns about the potential respiratory issues. Sarah is aware that smoking in any form can lead to lung irritation and coughing. She recalls reading studies that suggest regular smoking of cannabis can lead to similar respiratory issues as tobacco, such as bronchitis or increased mucus production. This knowledge makes her more cautious about frequently choosing to smoke. Switching to edibles, Sarah notices an immediate difference in how her body reacts. Without the smoke entering her lungs, she doesn't experience the coughing or the throat irritation that sometimes comes after smoking. Edibles provide a smoke-free alternative, which from a respiratory standpoint feels like a healthier option for her. However, Sarah also learns that edibles come with their own set of health considerations. The delayed onset of effects and the potential of overconsumption can lead to an uncomfortable experience, often referred to as greening out, where a person who ate a bit too much of an edible might feel extreme anxiety, discomfort, or even nausea. Sarah's journey also leads her to consider the long-term cognitive effects of regular cannabis use. While research is ongoing on the subject, she understands that heavy and prolonged use, especially when started at a younger age, may be linked to certain cognitive impairments. This piece of information makes her more conscious of her consumption frequency and quantity, as she wants to ensure that she remains within a safe limit. In terms of digestive health, Sarah finds edibles do not negatively affect her. However, she learns that this might not be the case for everyone. For individuals with certain gastrointestinal conditions, ingesting cannabis can lead to different effects or discomforts. The way edibles are metabolized in the liver and the gastrointestinal system means they can interact differently with the body compared to inhaled cannabis. However, certain types of edibles are easier on the digestion system than others, depending largely on their composition and the individual's digestive health. Here are some factors to consider. What types of ingredients does the edible contain? Turns out edibles made with fewer and simpler ingredients tend to be easier to digest. Products that avoid complex, heavy, or overly processed ingredients will generally be gentler on the stomach. High-fat foods can slow digestion and may cause discomfort, especially for those with certain digestive issues. Edibles with a lower fat content, like low-fat gummies or hard candies, can be easier on the digestive system compared to rich, buttery baked goods. For individuals with gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, gluten-free edibles are a must. Similarly, vegan edibles avoid dairy and animal products, which can be beneficial for those with lactose intolerance or certain dietary restrictions. Tinctures or oils are also excellent alternatives. These alternatives can be easier to digest, as they're often taken sublingually, meaning under your tongue, allowing for absorption directly into the bloodstream without going through the digestive process. Edibles that incorporate dietary fiber, often known simply as high-fiber edibles, can aid in digestion. Fiber helps regulate the digestive system, but it's important to consume fiber within your dietary limits, as too much can cause bloating or discomfort. Finally, for those sensitive to THC or its psychoactive effects, CBD-dominant edibles might offer a gentler alternative. CBD is known for its calming effects and is less likely to cause the digestive upset sometimes associated with high doses of THC. It's important for individuals to consider their own digestive health and dietary restrictions when choosing edibles. Starting with a small dose to gauge how your body reacts is always a good practice. If you have specific digestive concerns or dietary restrictions, consulting with a healthcare provider or a knowledgeable dispensary staff member can help guide your choices. Throughout her exploration, Sarah gains a comprehensive understanding of the health impacts of both smoking and eating cannabis. She realizes the importance of balancing her enjoyment with her health and well-being. This journey through different methods of cannabis consumption teaches her to be more attentive to her body's responses and to make informed choices based on both pleasures and the possible health implications of her cannabis use. So let's say cannabis is working well for you, like it is Sarah, and you're starting to think about long-term use. Well, regular and heavy use of cannabis, no matter the method, might be linked to some cognitive changes, especially if you start young. However, the research is still ongoing, so be sure to keep doing your due diligence on looking into the health effects of cannabis. In the weeks following her cannabis experimentation, Sarah begins to notice subtle differences in her cognitive functions depending on the method of consumption she chooses. When she smokes weed, the effects on her cognition are immediate but fleeting. She experiences a short-lived alteration in perception, a slight haziness that lifts as the high wears off. This immediate but short-term impact on her cognition is in line with the typical effects of smoking cannabis, as the THC is rapidly absorbed and then quickly metabolized. However, with edibles, Sarah observes a different cognitive trajectory. The prolonged and more intense high that comes with edibles leads to longer periods where she feels her cognitive abilities are slightly altered. She experiences more pronounced changes in her sensory perception and time awareness. This extended cognitive impact aligns with research indicating that the effects of edibles can last much longer, sometimes resulting in prolonged alterations in perception and cognitive function due to the longer-lasting presence of THC in the system. On the digestive front, Sarah's experience with edibles is relatively smooth, but she learns that this isn't the case for everyone. Remember, the process of digestion and liver metabolism of THC can vary significantly among individuals, affecting how one's body reacts to edibles. This variability is a crucial consideration for those exploring edibles, especially for the first time. Sarah also becomes aware of the potential for long-term cognitive effects with regular and heavy cannabis use. While the research is ongoing, studies suggest that persistent heavy use might be linked to long-term cognitive changes. This knowledge makes Sarah more mindful of her consumption habits, as she wants to ensure her use remains within safe and moderate limits to avoid any potential long-term cognitive risks. Throughout her journey, Sarah's understanding of the cognitive and digestive effects of smoking and eating weed deepens. She learns to respect the power of cannabis and the importance of being attentive to her body's responses. Her experiences with both methods of consumption highlight the need for responsible use and an awareness of the varying effects cannabis can have on different aspects of her mental and physical health. The contrast between smoking and eating cannabis is indeed stark, almost like comparing night and day, with each method offering a distinctively different experience. While smoking cannabis offers a more controlled social and cerebral high, edibles can transport you on a longer, more intense, and often introspective journey. This fundamental difference in experience is crucial for users to understand, as it can help inform not only the choice of consumption method, but also the setting and context in which cannabis is used. Whether opting for the immediate effects of smoking or the delayed but profound effects of edibles, understanding and respecting these differences ensures a safer, more enjoyable cannabis experience. As she continues to navigate her way through the experiences of smoking and eating cannabis, Sarah begins to appreciate the unique characteristics each method offers. When smoking, Sarah finds the experience to be more sociable and communal, especially when she's with friends. The act of passing around a joint and sharing the moment adds a social dimension to the experience, which she enjoys. The effects of smoking are more predictable for her, and she feels more in control, able to stop when she feels like she's reached her desired state. Conversely, Sarah's experience with edibles is markedly different. It's more of a solitary journey, introspective, and tends to be deeply personal. She finds the longer-lasting, more intense effects of edibles lend themselves to a reflective experience, often leading her to deeper thoughts or creative bursts. This is something many users report, a sense of profound introspection or heightened creativity when consuming edibles, likely due to the stronger and more prolonged psychoactive effects. Sarah also notices the difference in the physical sensations between the two methods. Smoking gives her an immediate head high, a lightness that feels centered around her mind and eyes. In contrast, edibles provide a more body-focused high, a deep sense of physical relaxation that seems to emanate from her core and spread outward. Through her exploration, Sarah gains a newfound respect for the diverse experiences that cannabis in its various forms can offer. She learns to choose her method of consumption based on the kind of experience she seeks, whether it's the social, controlled high of smoking or the introspective, prolonged journey of edibles. Her journey underscores the importance of understanding not just the physical and cognitive effects, but also the qualitative differences in the cannabis experience. Through Sarah's story, we've seen the importance of education and personal responsibility in cannabis use. Remember, everyone is different. When it comes to weed, it's about finding the right balance and method that suits your individual needs and preferences, all while being mindful of the potential health implications and cognitive effects. How will cannabis survive the apocalypse? Did William Shakespeare smoke a bowl before he wrote a play? Why do you get the munchies after toking? Which presidents liked to get dank on their downtime? And can you smoke so much weed that it kills you? These are 50 chronically insane facts about weed. Fact 50. Cannabis is believed to be one of the earliest plants to be cultivated by humans. Mentions of it have been found in writings from as far back as 3000 BC, and possible evidence of cannabis use has been identified in Neolithic archaeological sites that are over 10,000 years old. Most of the early evidence of cannabis use comes from Asia, with prehistoric cannabis residues and hemp fiber imprints having been found across China, Japan, India, and the Middle East. Historians believe that these ancient cultures used the plant not just for its psychoactive properties, but also to make rope, clothes, shoes, paper, and even as a food source. Fact 49. Have you ever wondered where the word marijuana actually comes from? Well, there are a couple of competing theories. According to one popular story, it comes from a Nahuatl word meaning prisoner. This explanation probably isn't true, though, as it was first popularized by anti-drug campaigner Harry J. Anslinger in the 1930s. The more likely explanation is that it comes from the Chinese mahren hua, meaning hemp flower. Ganja, another popular nickname for the drug, comes from the Sanskrit word for the hemp plant. Fact 48. People have had it out for cannabis for over 700 years. Throughout history, marijuana has been mainly used for medicinal and spiritual purposes, but even so, it's always been a pretty controversial substance. In fact, the first known laws restricting marijuana use come from all the way back in the Middle Ages. The earliest known anti-cannabis legislation is believed to be a law passed in the 1300s by an Arabian emir called Sodun Sheikuni. Cannabis use was also made illegal by Napoleon Bonaparte during his reign and was widely outlawed throughout the British Empire during its heyday. Fact 47. The United States has something of a love-hate relationship with the hemp plant. America started restricting the sale of the drug in 1906, but only made it outright illegal in 1937 when the Marijuana Tax Act was passed. For some reason, hemp was outlawed alongside cannabis, but that wasn't the case for long. Once the U.S. entered World War II, the government started making propaganda that encouraged hemp cultivation. Since the hemp plant could be used to make cheap but durable rope and canvas, that was vital to the war effort. Hemp was then banned again in the 70s under the Controlled Substances Act, and the plant remained illegal until the Controlled Substances Act was revised in 2018. Even though the cultivation of hemp is still strictly regulated, in 2019 the U.S. managed to become the world's third biggest hemp producer after China and Canada. Fact 46. Urkel has his own bespoke line of weed. In 2021, actor Jaleel White launched his own brand of recreational weed called It's Purple, a variant of the Purple Urkel cannabis strain. Jaleel White, of course, was famous back in the 90s for playing the nerdy Steve Urkel on the sitcom Family Matters. When asked about It's Purple by Forbes, White said he started the business because he was tired of seeing his character's name and likeness used without his involvement, and figured he could get in on the action. He even filmed ads for it alongside Snoop Dogg, where he was fully in character as Steve Urkel. Fact 45. Reggae legend Bob Marley was buried with weed. Perhaps one of the most famous tokers of all time, music god Bob Marley took the plant to the grave with him. When he died of cancer in 1981, according to some accounts, he was buried with a football, his beloved Gibson Les Paul guitar, and a bud of chronic. Hopefully, he's still lighting it up in the great beyond. Fact 44. There are over 1,000 ways to say it. Literally. Time magazine has reported that there are over 1,200 popularly used slang terms for cannabis, and here are some of our favorites: weed, bud, ganja, chronic, grass, wacky tobacco, reefer, herb, green goddess, sweet Mary Jane, Donna Juanita, pot, dank, and the devil's lettuce. If we forgot one of your favorites, let us know in the comments. Fact 43. Tupac's closest friends smoked him. And no, that's not a euphemism. When Tupac was tragically murdered in 1996, his old band and close friends, the Outlaws, claimed to have gave him a true rapper send-off, rolling some of his cremains into a joint with some weed and smoking him up. While some have doubted these claims, the Outlaws themselves have stuck to their story. Personally, we think this one's up there with Marley's coffin weed. Fact 42. A group of weed-hunting teens invented 420. It's one of the most popular codes for cannabis, and it's the reason that April 20th, previously best known as the birthday of the decidedly unchill Adolf Hitler, is now synonymous with sharing some herbal love. In the early 1970s, a group of high schoolers from San Rafael High School in California went hunting for a legendary weed farm in their area, using the code 420 to signify the hunts. While they never found the El Dorado of ganja, their story and their secret code got picked up by the magazine High Times, and the band Grateful Dead leading to the phrase becoming forever cemented in cannabis culture language. Fact 41. Washington was the first U.S. state to legalize recreational marijuana use. And this is kinda poetic, given the state's namesake, America's first president, George Washington, famously cultivated hemp crops. He was a big fan of the plant, mentioning it over 90 times in his personal diaries. But there is no evidence that he ever used it to get high. Instead, he likely grew the plant due to its valuable resource for manufacturing those sturdy ropes we mentioned earlier for use in ship construction. The original United States flag, created by Betsy Ross, was even made out of the kind of hemp that Washington loved cultivating. It's as American as apple pie. Fact 40. A lot of celebrities smoke weed. Seriously, it'd be a whole video to list them all, but some of the most prominent, famous, avowed potheads include Jennifer Lawrence, Kirsten Dunst, Miley Cyrus, Zoe Kravitz, Lady Gaga, Brad Pitt, Jane Fonda, Harrison Ford, Charlize Theron, Pete Davidson, Morgan Freeman, Patrick Stewart, Rihanna, Snoop Dogg and Seth Rogen, duh, Willie Nelson, Woody Harrelson, Kendall Jenner, and Matthew McConaughey. And those are just the ones who admit it. Fact 39. Washington wasn't the only president with a history of weed use, and these presidents actually did smoke it. George W. Bush is an admitted weed user, and Barack Obama even had a weed-smoking club in his youth called the Choom Gang. According to some of the Choom Gang's other members, Obama actually pioneered some new weed consumption techniques, including TA, or total absorption, and roof hits. And yes, there is a cruel irony to the fact that both those presidents smoked weed, but neither of them legalized it on the federal level. We guess they just wanted to keep it all to themselves. Fact 38. The government could be making billions of dollars from marijuana. Extrapolating from the tax money that states with legal weed have already made, it's estimated that across the entire United States, the federal government could make $8.5 billion in tax revenue, and potentially more if they institute a so-called potency tax, where taxation of cannabis is put on a sliding scale based on how potent the strain is. And even this is nothing compared to the money that private industry stands to make. It's estimated that if weed was legalized in all 50 states, it would quickly become a bigger market than organic food. Fact 37. The U.S. military experimented with weaponized weed. Researchers at the Edgewood Arsenal facility in Maryland pioneered dimethylheptylpyrin. Try saying that 3 times fast. An extremely potent cannabinoid agent that had an elimination half-life of 20 to 39 hours. That's some serious sticky. In addition to the standard sedative and hallucinogenic effect, it also caused low blood pressure, dizziness, fainting, ataxia, and muscle weakness. So much so that someone under the effects of dimethylheptylpyrin had difficulty even standing upright. Obviously, the researchers at Edgewood didn't invent this just so U.S. soldiers could get high on government-subsidized ultra weed. They were exploring the possible use as a non-lethal crowd control agent, but that fell through because of the potential risks involved to the health of certain at-risk users and the political sensitivity of working with weed. Fact 36. For some people, marijuana use is a religious affair, and some countries even legally recognize this. In Italy, after a lengthy court battle back in 2008, it was deemed that people of the Rastafarian faith could keep weed for purely personal use as a religious sacrament, and in possession cases, it would be up to the courts to decide, based on the quantity of the weed, whether it was for personal use or trafficking. Fact 35. Weed is giving coffee a run for its money. At least in Denver, in 2011, some counts showed weed dispensaries outnumbering Starbucks locations 300 to 266. Weed dispensaries were so rife that a popular local magazine even had a weed reviewer who gave their take on the local chronic. Fact 34. Weed is the world's favorite illicit drug. While debate rages on about how exactly weed is classified, one thing definitely isn't up for debate: the fact that people absolutely love it. According to some data, 219 million people, that's 4.3% of the global population between the ages of 16 and 64, used cannabis at least once in 2021. Fact 33. One of the first sales ever brokered on the internet was allegedly weed. In 1971, a Stanford student and an MIT student connected over the ARPANET, the precursor of the internet created by the precursor of DARPA. How did these two students of two of the country's most prestigious learning institutions use this connection forged over a revolutionary new technology? To get high, of course. They organized the sale of weed and in the process became accidental pioneers of illicit e-commerce. Fact 32. How much weed does it take to kill you? Well, We can only discuss this theoretically given that there are no recorded deaths related to cannabis overdose. Of course, it is possible to have a bad reaction, especially if you take too many edibles, which have a more potent high than smoking. But when it comes to drugs that are still illegal, cannabis is still one of the safest out there, compared to fentanyl, where as little as 2 milligrams can be fatal. Fact 31. Some people have proposed medical marijuana for dogs. However, while some pet owners have given anecdotal evidence of their sick pets having pain relieved by marijuana, most veterinary experts are skeptical. Dogs in particular are extremely vulnerable to marijuana toxicosis, especially when weed is consumed in a vector that dogs already shouldn't be eating, like brownies. So just to be safe, stick only to the treatments prescribed by professionals when treating your sick pets, or you could be putting their life on the line. Fact 30. Weed is in the air over Italy. And no, it isn't because Italy has a massive Rastafarian population who just love indulging in their newly legalized religious sacraments. We're not entirely sure why they did this, but Italy's Institute for Atmospheric Pollution Research decided to conduct a year-long study to monitor the effects of psychotropic substances in the air in 8 different Italian cities: Bologna, Florence, Milan, Naples, Palermo, Rome, Turin, and Verona. They ended up finding trace amounts of marijuana and cocaine in all 8 of them. Fact 29. A North Carolina hospital thought people were toking up around newborns. Social services started getting extremely concerned when urine tests from a number of newborns appeared to show trace amounts of marijuana in their systems, believed to be a result of secondhand smoke from overly mellow parents. However, when they dug deeper, they found out that the actual truth was even stranger. Chemicals in several different baby soaps, specifically Johnson & Johnson's head-to-toe baby wash, Johnson & Johnson bedtime bath, CVS nighttime baby bath, Aveeno soothing relief creamy wash, and Aveeno wash shampoo, seemed to trigger false positives for marijuana. If this wasn't discovered, it could have resulted in some life-ruining accusations getting thrown around. Fact 28. Illegal weed operations have been killing off owls. In another valuable argument for legalization, illegal pot operations have been having a ruinous effect on local ecosystems. In 2012, 2 rare spotted owls were found dead in Northern California's Mendocino County. The culprit? Rat poison, specifically rat poison used by a local illegal Kush operation to keep pests away from their crop. But it isn't just the owls. The fisher, a rare forest mammal native to the area, has also been put in a dangerous position by careless weed farmers. Rat poison has been found in the system of 85% of dead fishers found in the area, also believed to be caused by illegal weed operations. Fact 27. Is weed getting stronger? Researchers studied 36,800 samples of weed captured by the DEA over the last 20 years and found 2 interesting results. The amount of THC, the psychoactive compound in marijuana, has increased, and the amount of CBD, the chemical compound most often touted as having health benefits, has decreased. So when old stoners tell you that the weed was more chill back in their day, they're not just blowing smoke. Well, they probably still are, but just not about that. Fact 26. You can be allergic to weed. As if life for people with allergies wasn't hard enough, yes, you can also be allergic to Puff the Magic Dragon, both its pollen and its smoke. Allergic reactions can include runny noses, sneezing, irritation of the nasal passages, hives, and in one extremely rare case, anaphylaxis. For some people who experience allergic reactions to weed, it isn't actually the weed itself that gets them. Improperly stored weed can sometimes get moldy, and that mold sometimes has allergenic properties. Fact 25. Weed dependency is a genetic lottery. Like with all drugs, everyone has a different tolerance for weed, and the same goes for whether someone is likely to become dependent on it. Researchers have identified 3 different genetic markers as predictors for the likelihood of cannabis dependence. Fascinatingly, these same genetic markers are often also predictors for depression, showing that people who suffer from depression are sometimes more likely to use weed as an unhealthy coping mechanism. Fact 24. If you're an unlucky stoner, you might get cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And that might sound horrifying, but, well, there is no but. It actually is horrifying. Chronic cannabis users who suffer from the syndrome will experience periods of severe nausea followed by cycles of profuse vomiting and abdominal pain over a 48-hour period. That doesn't sound like a fun time to us. Fact 23. Drug traffickers can get really creative with how they smuggle weed. Here's a highlight reel of some of the most deranged ways weed has been smuggled. 766 pounds of pot hidden in broccoli, 1,500 pounds hidden in coconuts, 4,000 pounds hidden in fake limes, $500,000 worth of it hidden in fake carrots, and even weed hidden in vats of strawberry jam. It's kind of weird how most of them are just fruits and vegetables. Let's see some creativity, guys. Fact 22. Debates have raged on for years on whether Shakespeare liked to partake in a bit of the devil's lettuce. During an excavation of the immortal bard's home, 2 pipes were found with, among other things, cannabis residue. Immediately this, plus Shakespeare's reference to a noted weed during one of his sonnets, had people claiming that one of history's greatest playwrights was an avowed stoner. This immediately led to scholarly debate after scholarly debate, with some on the side of weed, and the skeptics claiming that there's no proof that the pipes even belonged to Shakespeare. The debate has raged on for so long that Francis Thackeray, an anthropologist from South Africa, has requested the opportunity to exhume Shakespeare's grave and test his remains for any traces of cannabis. They might be taking this a little bit too seriously. Fact 21. Weed might change how you think about money. Studies have shown that cannabis reduces activity in the nucleus accumbens, a reward center of the brain involved in dopamine production. Those under the influence of cannabis are less likely to produce the kind of dopamine that motivates them toward external rewards, like money. That's why it can sometimes be difficult to get anything done while you're high. That and the fact that you're spending too much time thinking about old SpongeBob SquarePants episodes. Where does he get those pants? Fact 20. Why does weed give you the famous munchies? It's all down to the 3 magic letters THC. It stimulates the endocannabinoid receptors in the brain, which connect to regulation centers for everything from dopamine production to hunger. In most users, this triggers an appetite increase that has them reaching for the potato chips. While to most people this is just a little annoying, it can actually serve as a major medicinal effect for people undergoing a loss of appetite during chemotherapy. Medical marijuana can even get these in-treatment cancer patients eating again, which is a huge boon for their overall health and quality of life. Fact 19. The Rastafarians aren't the only religious group who use cannabis in holy ceremonies. And we do mean holy ceremonies, with an I. During the Festival of Colors, many Hindus enjoy a nice, refreshing cup of tandai, which literally means cooling off. But for some, the tandai is a little holier than others, because it's spiked with bhang, an edible strain of cannabis found in India. Partakers have reported feeling a light, pleasant buzz upon consumption. The holy significance of the bhang-triggered tandai links to an old tale about Lord Shiva, but that's a little too much to get into in a video about fun weed facts. Fact 18. Cannabis can be used to treat epilepsy. As a life-threatening chronic condition that's believed to affect around 50 million people globally, doctors and scientists are always looking for new treatment options for sufferers. Thankfully, certain synthetic cannabinoids have shown promise in reducing the severity of seizures. The FDA-approved drug Epidiolex has been effective in treating 2 different extremely rare and dangerous forms of epilepsy, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and Dravet syndrome. And as cannabis laws continue to relax, even more of the medicinal possibilities of cannabis are likely to be explored by researchers. Fact 17. In some cases, cannabis can actually help treat other addictions. The lighter side of the nucleus accumbens dulling comes with the fact that cannabis use can reduce cravings for other addictive substances if a person is trying to break their habit. This is true for more common addictions like alcohol, as well as some of the harder addictions. In more extreme cases, cannabis has even been an unexpected boon in helping people affected by the opioid epidemic. Fact 16. If you're at genetic risk of schizophrenia, you should keep off the grass. While this won't be the case with most users, multiple studies have shown that people genetically predisposed to psychotic disorders, like schizophrenia, may see their chances of developing symptoms worsen, especially if they use cannabis or are exposed to cannabis use earlier in life. In addition to lowering cognitive function with extended use, it increases the likelihood of hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia. Plenty of cannabis users report temporary paranoia during use, but when you're still experiencing it between sessions, then maybe it's time to lay off the leaf. Fact 15. One of the biggest steps back for America's marijuana legalization came with one of its most controversial presidents, Tricky Dick himself, Richard Nixon. As we know from the hours upon hours of rambling recordings he took of himself, Nixon's war on drugs was actually a war on disenfranchisement, intended to lock up and take the voting rights from hippies and black people who generally opposed his policy positions. And the racist legacy of Nixon's war on drugs still exists today. Black people are arrested at greater rates for weed possession than white people in America, even in states where marijuana is legal. all thanks to Tricky Dick. Fact 14. Why is an edible high so much different from a smoke high? It's practically a meme among weed lovers that while smoke hits you quicker, edibles wait for a bit and then hit you like a truck. They give a more powerful body high that can endure for hours and leave you in a living dream or a waking nightmare. So what's the difference? Why the delayed action and upped intensity? According to neuroscientist Nick Giacomas, the issue isn't that weed is metabolized differently, it's that it's going to get metabolized to different degrees in different parts of the body, depending on the route of administration. The real difference between edibles and smoking or vaping is that with edibles, a much larger fraction of delta-9 THC makes it to the liver first. There, it gets converted to 11-hydroxy-THC. So in other words, if you smoke or vape, the ratio of 11-hydroxy-THC to delta-9 THC is quite low, and if you take an edible, it's much higher. Fact 13. Weed will survive the apocalypse. That's because cannabis seeds are just one of the many samples kept at Svalbard Global Seed Vault. They store over 21,500 cannabis seeds from 17 different countries, kept safe and sound in the event of an ecological collapse or a world-ending cataclysm. So don't worry if you're part of the post-apocalyptic tribe or a Mad Max-style raider gang in the wasteland, you can still enjoy a toke at the end of the day. Fact 12. The inventor of weed brownies was a plucky American activist, Mary Jane Rathbun, and no, that isn't why weed is called Mary Jane, it's just a funny coincidence, was also known as Brownie Mary, and was a pioneer for both cannabis legalization and the rights and protections of people suffering from AIDS at the height of the AIDS crisis. As part of her charity work for AIDS patients, she'd bake cannabis into brownies and give them out, and in the process, she noticed that it seemed to alleviate some of their suffering related to their illness. Her work is likely one of the many important foundations for cannabis research and activism to this day, and her work is still used despite her passing away from a heart attack in 1999. Fact 11. In Bhutan, the weed is as plentiful as it is illegal. It naturally grows there, especially in the Bhutanese countryside where it's so prolific that in some places it grows out of the cracks in pavements. It's illegal to cultivate it as a drug in Bhutan, but farmers often feed it to their pigs to fatten them up. Maybe humans will someday get that privilege when the pigs get high enough to actually fly. Fact 10. A dangerous weed rumor about North Korea often does the rounds. Reported by a number of 420-friendly publications like High Times and Mary Jane, it was an urban legend that despite all the other dystopian restrictions, the North Korean government is surprisingly chill about cannabis use, especially for tourists. While this is the kind of wacky North Korea fact that does numbers on the internet, it is something that might get you imprisoned or killed if you take it too seriously. While hemp is cultivated as an industrial production material in North Korea, cannabis is classified with the same drug restrictions as heroin and cocaine. And given the horrible fates undergone by tourists in North Korea, for something as seemingly minor as stealing a political poster, you really should not take your chances breaking any of their laws. Or better yet, just don't go there. Fact 9. Who has the world's cheapest and most expensive cannabis? In a study conducted in 2018, it was found that Japan had the world's most expensive green, coming in at $32 per gram. If flying high in the land of the rising sun feels a little steep for your wallet, then you'd be better off vacationing in Quito, Ecuador, where the price of marijuana averages $1.34 per gram. Fact 8. Malaysia has some of the most brutal anti-drug laws in the world. Planting a single cannabis seed will put you in prison for the rest of your life. Being caught possessing 20 grams will get you lashed, 50 grams will get you 5 years in jail, and a fine equating to almost $5,000. Up until 2018, having 200 grams was considered trafficking, and you could get sentenced to death. But now, it'll only put you behind bars for the rest of your life. Yay? Fact 7. Carl's Jr. once served a weed burger for $4.20. Seriously, back in 2019, as part of a special promotion for $4.20, they released the Rocky Mountain High Cheeseburger Delight, which had a special Santa Fe sauce infused with a small quantity of CBD. It was only available for a single day at one of their locations in Colorado, but for any pot fans in the area, it was a day to remember. Fact 6. Ever been curious about the actual difference between a joint, a spliff, and a blunt, but been too afraid to look lame if you asked? The difference is actually pretty simple. Joints are small quantities of cannabis wrapped in rolling paper. Spliffs aren't pure cannabis, they're a mix of cannabis and tobacco in rolling paper. And blunts, if we can be blunt about it, are bigger loads of cannabis wrapped in cigar or blunt wraps, which normally also contain tobacco. Now you're familiar with all the key weed smoking lingo. Fact 5. One man had the guts to smoke weed in the White House while weed was still illegal everywhere in the United States. It was none other than country music god Willie Nelson, who during the Carter administration snuck a joint into the White House and lit it up on the roof with the president's son, Chip Carter. It was thought to be a stoner urban legend for years until ex-President Jimmy Carter himself confirmed that the story was true. Rock on, Willie. Fact 4. Weed has been inspiring Hollywood movies for almost a century. Stoner comedy is a movie institution, with stoned adventures being seen in Pineapple Express, Dude, Where's My Car, and the Harold and Kumar trilogy. But the first ever movie inspired by weed was 1936's Reefer Madness. But this wasn't a comedy, at least not intentionally. It was a propaganda movie that implied smoking weed would turn you into a violent psychopathic killer and lead your life to ruin. Ironically, a lot of people get high to watch and laugh at it today. Fact 3. There are some negative side effects of smoking weed that you should look out for. While a lot of weed's impacts have historically been overblown as part of government scare campaigns, there are some scientifically proven negative effects. These include increased heart rate, which has been recorded as lasting for up to 3 hours after the user smoked. Breathing problems, since putting any kind of smoke into your lungs is going to irritate your airways. Chronic weed users also experience the classic smoker's cough and experience unpleasant phlegm buildup that leads to them coughing up gross gunk. And then there's the vomiting, nausea, paranoia, and sometimes even hallucinations that we mentioned earlier. And in the long run, chronic cannabis users might find themselves struggling with sleep issues, as well as difficulty self-motivating. This won't be true for all users, but there's always a non-zero chance. Fact 2. You can actually experience weed withdrawals when trying to come off the stuff. While experiencing the negative side effects of quitting weed is actually quite rare and is nothing like coming off of harder drugs like heroin, there are a constant set of symptoms for those who do suffer from weed withdrawals. So what can you expect from experiencing weed withdrawals? The most common symptoms include reduced appetite, the opposite of the famous munchies, mood swings, and a general sense of irritability, difficulty sleeping, including insomnia and strange dreams, headaches, an inability to focus, weed cravings, chills and cold sweats, digestive issues, and a general feeling of depression. That's why a lot of chronic users struggle to come off this stuff. And of course, Fact 1. The U.S. Coast Guard seized 54 tons of marijuana in a single bust back in 1977. The night train seizure occurred off the coast of Florida and was the beginning of Operation Stopgap, the first interagency initiative to stop drug trafficking. It was carried out by the Coast Guard, the DEA, and the federal marshals, and remains one of the biggest weed busts in history. Welcome to our deep dive into the world of methamphetamine, commonly known as meth, through the eyes of Jake, a 25-year-old whose journey with this potent drug reveals the stark reality of its effects. What is meth? Well, this powerful central nervous system stimulant has gained notoriety for its intense impact on both the brain and the body. We'll explore this in detail through Jake's journey, from the allure of his first encounter to the challenging road of its aftermath, providing a real-life context to the scientific and medical insights about this substance. Jake's story begins like many others, with curiosity and the influence of his social circle. Initially drawn to meth for its promise of heightened energy, euphoria, and a sense of invincibility, Jake soon finds himself in uncharted waters. Meth's appeal lies in its ability to release high levels of dopamine rapidly in the brain, leading to feelings of extreme pleasure and confidence. As we delve deeper into Jake's experiences, we'll see how meth not only alters his mental state, but also brings about profound physical changes. Let's start at the beginning. Jake's foray into the world of methamphetamine kicks off at a weekend party, a scene of curiosity and experimentation. Encouraged by his friends who tout meth's ability to boost energy and euphoria, he decides to try it for the first time. The initial experience is nothing like he's ever felt before. An intense rush of euphoria and a surge of energy courses through him. He feels on top of the world. This immediate and powerful sensation is due to meth's rapid release of dopamine in the brain, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. In the hours following his first dose, Jake feels invincible. He's more talkative, his senses are heightened, and he feels a powerful connection to the music and people around him. This heightened state of alertness and sociability is caused by the drug's stimulant properties that increase brain activity. However, Jake is totally unaware of the cost of this euphoria. Meth's manipulation of dopamine not only creates a high, but also begins to rewire his brain's reward system. Regular use of meth can lead to changes in the brain's chemistry and structure. These changes can diminish the brain's ability to experience pleasure naturally, setting the stage for dependency. The aftermath of the high is something Jake is unprepared for. As the effects of meth wear off, he's left feeling drained and lethargic, a stark contrast to the earlier rush of energy. This crash is the body's response to the intense stimulation it's undergone. The depletion of neurotransmitters following meth use leads to feelings of fatigue and depression, a common experience for many users as the drug wears off. Despite the yucky crash, the memory of the euphoria lingers in Jake's mind. He finds himself craving that intense rush again, obsessing about what his next opportunity to use meth might be. This craving is a direct result of the drug's impact on the brain's reward system, making the experience intensely memorable and desirable. Jake's initial encounter with meth sets the tone for his journey ahead. The immediate euphoria and energy it provides are amazing, but they come at a cost. Following his initial experience with meth, Jake finds himself drawn to the drug for more than just euphoria. During his next few encounters with meth, he notices a significant boost in his confidence and sociability. In social settings, he feels more outgoing and articulate, a stark contrast to his usual reserved nature. This newfound confidence is intoxicating to Jake, making him feel more alive and connected in social gatherings. Scientific research explains how stimulants like meth can enhance certain personality traits, such as extroversion and verbal fluency, making social interactions more engaging and enjoyable, especially for those who tend to be a bit more introverted or socially shy. Jake's friends start to notice the change too. They see him as more vibrant and lively at parties, often becoming the center of attention. This change in his social demeanor, while initially seen as positive by his peers, is a direct effect of the meth's impact on his brain's chemistry. However, this increased sociability comes with its downsides. Jake soon begins to rely on meth to feel confident in social situations, creating a psychological association between the drug and social success. This dependence is a slippery slope. The more Jake uses meth to feel confident, the more he feels unable to socialize without it. At the same time, Jake starts to overlook the negative aspects of his increasingly reckless behavior. Under the influence of meth, he becomes less aware of social cues and boundaries, sometimes leading to confrontations or inappropriate behavior. Despite these warning signs, the allure of being more outgoing and confident keeps drawing Jake back to meth. He starts using the drug not just at parties, but also in other social settings, hoping to maintain that heightened state of confidence and sociability. This pattern of use can reinforce the belief that one needs the drug to function socially, further entrenching the habit. As Jake continues down this path, the temporary boosts in confidence and sociability begin to shape his identity and interactions. He increasingly associates his social successes with meth use, creating a dangerous linkage that overlooks the drug's harmful effects on his health and well-being. As Jake's use of meth becomes more frequent, he begins to experience a significant decrease in his appetite. This is a common side effect of meth use, as the drug stimulates the central nervous system, which can suppress hunger signals. Initially, Jake doesn't pay much attention to this change. He's more focused on the energy and the euphoria that meth provides. However, over time, this suppressed appetite leads to noticeable weight loss. Jake's friends and family start to notice his changing appearance. His clothes hang more loosely on him, and his face appears thinner. While some friends express concern, others compliment his weight loss, unaware of the unhealthy origins. This change in appearance is not just a cosmetic issue. Rapid weight loss due to appetite suppression can lead to malnutrition and a host of related health problems. The physical effects of this weight loss become increasingly evident in Jake's energy levels and his overall health. Despite the initial surge of energy from meth use, he starts to feel fatigued more easily due to a lack of proper nutrition. Of course, there are long-term consequences of malnutrition, including weakened immune function and decreased muscle mass, both of which Jake begins to experience. Jake tries to ignore these signs, attributing them to his busy lifestyle rather than his meth use. However, as he loses more weight, he starts to struggle with basic physical tasks. His strength diminishes, and he finds himself feeling dizzy and lightheaded more frequently. These symptoms are indicative of the body's response to starvation and nutrient deficiencies. The psychological impact of his weight loss and malnutrition also becomes apparent. Jake starts to experience mood swings and irritability, which he initially attributes to stress. However, research shows that nutritional deficiencies, especially in essential vitamins and minerals, can significantly affect mental health and cognitive function. Jake's increasing use of methamphetamine leads to significant disruption in his sleep patterns. The stimulating effects of the drug, which once seemed beneficial for his long nights out, now begin to take a toll on his ability to get restful sleep. Nights after using meth are marked by restless tossing and turning, and even when he wants to sleep, he finds himself wide awake. This insomnia is a common side effect of stimulants like meth. as they increase brain activity and alertness, making it difficult to wind down. Sleep studies have documented how stimulant abuse can lead to severe disruptions in sleep architecture, resulting in insomnia and poor sleep quality. The lack of sleep starts to affect Jake's daily life. He feels constantly fatigued, he struggles to concentrate, and he becomes more prone to mood swings. Despite feeling exhausted, he can't seem to get the restorative sleep his body needs. This vicious cycle of stimulant use and sleep deprivation slowly becomes a nightmare for Jake. He's never well rested, and he feels like he's always chasing that ever-elusive good night's sleep. Jake even experiences change in his sleep patterns on days when he doesn't use meth. He finds himself sleeping for extended periods, often at odd hours, trying to catch up on the rest he missed. This erratic sleep schedule further disrupts his body's natural circadian rhythm, leading to a condition known as substance-induced sleep disorder. This disorder can significantly impact one's overall health and well-being. The chronic sleep deprivation begins to have more severe implications for Jake's mental health. Research shows the prolonged sleep disruption can lead to cognitive impairments, heightened anxiety, and an increased risk of developing depression. Jake starts to feel the mental strain, with his thoughts becoming cloudier and his ability to manage stress diminishing. Jake's physical health also suffers due to a lack of sleep. His immune system weakens, making him more susceptible to illnesses, and he notices a decrease in his physical performance. As Jake's meth use escalates, he begins to experience physical symptoms that are more alarming. One of the most concerning is hyperthermia, an abnormally high body temperature. During prolonged meth use sessions, particularly while dancing or in crowded environments, Jake finds himself overheating. His skin is flushed and excessively sweaty. This condition is a direct result of meth's impact on the body's thermoregulatory mechanisms, causing the body to overheat, which can be dangerous if not quickly addressed. Another serious side effect Jake encounters is dehydration. Combination of reduced fluid intake, increased physical activity, and the diuretic effect of meth leaves him severely dehydrated. Symptoms like dry mouth, headaches, and dizziness become common after his meth use. These signs of dehydration are particularly concerning because even mild dehydration can significantly impact physical and cognitive functions. Jake's friends start to notice these physical changes and express their concern. They point out his flushed appearance and excessive sweating, even when he's not exerting himself physically. Some nights, Jake feels disoriented and weak. Ignoring these warning signs, Jake continues his meth use, leading to more severe episodes of hyperthermia. On a few occasions, he experiences muscle cramps and a rapid heartbeat, signaling that his body is struggling to cope with the elevated temperature. Unchecked hyperthermia can lead to heat stroke, a life-threatening condition requiring immediate medical attention. Jake's dehydration also worsens. He begins to experience more severe headaches, and his urine becomes dark, indicating severe dehydration. He learns from a quick Google search that prolonged dehydration can lead to kidney damage, a risk that becomes increasingly real for him. As Jake continues his journey with meth, he begins to experience one of its most notorious side effects: severe dental decay, commonly known as meth mouth. Initially, he notices his teeth becoming discolored, which he attributes to poor oral hygiene. However, the problem quickly escalates as he starts to experience toothache and gum pain. This rapid deterioration of dental health is a hallmark of chronic meth use. Meth's acidic nature, combined with its tendency to cause dry mouth, creates an environment conducive to tooth decay and gum disease. Ignoring the initial signs of dental issues, Jake continues his meth use. However, the problem worsens, leading to more visible and painful symptoms. His gums become swollen and inflamed. He starts losing teeth. The severe dental decay is not just cosmetic, it's indicative of the significant impact meth has on one's overall health. Meth mouth results from a combination of factors, including the drug's acidity, dry mouth, poor oral hygiene, and a general neglect of health that often accompanies substance abuse. Jake's dental issues begin to affect his self-esteem and his social interactions. He becomes self-conscious about his appearance and hesitant to smile or speak in public. Confronted with the reality of deteriorating dental health, Jake seeks help from a dentist. The dentist explains the extent of the damage and the need for extensive dental work. The professional intervention is a turning point for Jake. He realizes the severity of the consequences of his meth use. In addition to the physical and aesthetic consequences, Jake's dental issues also impact his nutrition. With his ability to chew compromised, he finds it difficult to eat certain foods, leading to an unbalanced diet. Jake's ongoing battle with methamphetamine takes a further toll on his physical appearance, particularly his skin. He starts to notice the development of sores and acne, a common issue among chronic meth users. Initially, these skin problems manifest as small itchy spots, but soon they evolve into larger, painful sores. The cause of these skin issues is multifaceted. Meth can cause severe itching, leading users like Jake to scratch or pick at their skin, causing sores and lesions. Additionally, meth can reduce overall skin health, making it more prone to acne and other conditions. These skin problems exacerbate Jake's declining self-esteem. He becomes increasingly self-conscious about his appearance, leading to him avoiding social interactions and public settings. The visible nature of skin sores makes them particularly stigmatizing. The skin sores also pose a risk of infection, especially when proper hygiene is not maintained. In Jake's case, the lack of care for those wounds leads to infections that require medical attention. Despite these visible signs of deteriorating health, Jake finds it hard to break free from meth's grasp. Jake's struggle with skin issues are further complicated by his nutritional deficiencies and poor overall health. Malnutrition and dehydration, side effects of prolonged meth use, contribute to poor skin health and slow the healing process of wounds. What else is Jake dealing with? As his dependence on methamphetamine deepens, a noticeable shift occurs in his behavior, particularly in his decision-making process. He begins exhibiting increased risk-taking behaviors and impulsivity, a common effect associated with stimulant use. This change is not just confined to his drug use, it spills over to other areas of his life, including his finances, his relationships, and personal safety. One night, Jake makes a spur-of-the-moment decision to drive under the influence of meth, a decision that could have disastrous consequences. When he manages to reach his destination unharmed, this reckless behavior alarms his friends and family. Jake's impulsivity also manifests in financial decisions. He starts spending recklessly, often using his savings to buy meth or fund activities while under the influence. What's more, in his social interactions, Jake becomes more confrontational and less tolerant of frustration. He often acts without considering the consequences, straining his relationships with his friends and family. And at work, Jake's impulsivity begins to impact his performance. He makes hasty decisions without fully considering their implications, leading to mistakes and criticism from his colleagues and superiors. Jake's increasing use of methamphetamine brings a new and terrifying dimension to his struggle: the onset of psychosis and paranoia. Initially, Jake brushes off the occasional feelings of paranoia as mere side effects of the drug. However, as the meth use intensifies, the episodes become more frequent and severe. He starts experiencing hallucinations and delusions, believing that people are watching him or plotting against him. The hallucinations are vivid and often frightening. Jake sees shadowy figures and hears voices that aren't there, causing him great distress. These experiences are profoundly disorienting and exacerbate his sense of paranoia. In fact, meth-induced psychosis can closely mimic the symptoms of schizophrenia, making it difficult for users to distinguish reality from their drug-induced hallucinations. He also starts to become suspicious of his friends and family, often accusing them of betrayal or deceit without any basis. This behavior strains his relationship, leaving him feeling isolated and misunderstood. At work, Jake's paranoia manifests in a belief that his colleagues are conspiring against him. He reacts defensively to routine interactions, further alienating himself in a professional environment. The continuous cycle of paranoia and hallucinations takes a toll on Jake's mental health. He starts to lose touch with reality, finding it harder to distinguish between his drug-induced experiences and things that are actually happening in the real world. As Jake's use of methamphetamine continues to escalate, he starts to experience alarming physical symptoms indicative of heart problems. Initially, these manifest as palpitations and an uncomfortably rapid heartbeat, especially during and after meth use. Stimulants like meth can significantly increase heart rate and blood pressure, placing stress on the cardiovascular system. One evening after using a particularly high dose of meth, Jake experiences chest pain and a shortness of breath, symptoms he's never felt before. Alarmed, he visits the emergency room, where tests reveal signs of arrhythmia and irregular heartbeat. The doctors explain that meth use can cause various heart problems, ranging from arrhythmias to more serious conditions, like myocardial infarctions or heart attacks. The physical strain on his heart begins to take effect on Jake's overall stamina and his ability to engage in physical activities. Activities he once found easy now leave him feeling exhausted and short of breath. Research explains that stimulant-induced heart damage can significantly reduce physical endurance and overall quality of life. Jake's heart problems also begin to instill a constant fear of a potential heart attack. This anxiety adds to his already high stress levels, creating a vicious cycle that further exacerbates his condition. As Jake's battle with methamphetamine addiction continues, he begins to notice troubling changes in his cognitive abilities. Initially, these changes are subtle. He finds it harder to concentrate and struggles with tasks that require sustained mental effort. His memory also starts to falter. He often forgets appointments and misplaces things. The cognitive impairments Jake experiences begin to affect his daily life significantly. At work, he struggles to keep up with his tasks, often making errors, or forgetting important details. His decision-making skills are compromised, leading to poor judgment and ineffective problem-solving. Jake's friends and family keep noticing these changes with a deepening concern about his addiction. They comment on his lack of focus in conversations and his inability to remember recent events. In an attempt to counteract these cognitive problems, Jake tries using meth in smaller doses, hoping to regain the initial clarity and focus the drug once provided. However, this only leads to a temporary improvement, followed by further decline. Researchers warn that continued use of meth, even in smaller doses, can lead to a progressive worsening of cognitive functions. But even with all these issues, Jake is hooked on meth. As his struggle with addiction deepens, its impact extends beyond his physical and mental health to significantly affect his social life and relationships. His friends start to notice a change in his behavior. He becomes more and more withdrawn and less interested in activities he once enjoyed. Jake's relationship with his family also suffers. They express concern about his health and the changes in his behavior. But Jake often responds with anger or defensiveness. Family gatherings become tense, and Jake starts avoiding them altogether. At work, Jake's performance continues to decline. His inability to concentrate and frequent absences lead to a warning from his employer. His colleagues, who once viewed him as reliable and competent, now see him as unreliable and even a burden. In terms of his love life, Jake finds it difficult to maintain a stable relationship. His partner becomes frustrated with his lack of engagement and the secretive nature of his drug use. The trust between them erodes, leading to frequent arguments and mutual unhappiness, conflict, mistrust, and eventual breakdown. The changes in Jake's social circle become more evident. He starts associating more with other meth users, finding a common bond in their shared experiences with the drug. However, these relationships are often superficial and centered around substance use. As Jake's use of methamphetamine progresses, he develops a clear dependency on the drug. The need for meth becomes a central focus in his life, overshadowing other priorities and interests. Initially, meth was a choice for recreational use, but it's transformed into a necessity for Jake to function daily. Alongside dependency, Jake also develops tolerance to meth. He needs increasingly larger doses to achieve the same high that smaller amounts once provided. This escalation in use is a direct result of his body adapting to the presence of meth, reducing its responsiveness over time. The development of tolerance brings about its own set of challenges for Jake. Financially, sustaining his meth habit becomes more burdensome as he requires more of the drug. Physically, the increased doses put Jake at a higher risk of experiencing severe side effects and overdose. Psychologically, Jake's tolerance to meth exacerbates his feelings of hopelessness and entrapment. He feels trapped in a cycle where he needs to use more meth to function, but is increasingly aware of the harm it's causing him. After months of struggling with his methamphetamine addiction, Jake reaches a pivotal moment, the realization that he needs help. This epiphany comes after a particularly harrowing night where he experiences intense paranoia and a near overdose. Shaken by this experience and the cumulative toll of his addiction, Jake decides to seek professional help. Jake's first step in seeking help is to confide in his family. Despite the strained relationships, his family responds with support and concern, helping him research treatment options. They find a local rehabilitation center that specializes in meth addiction. The family support proves to be invaluable for Jake in his recovery process. At the rehabilitation center, Jake undergoes a comprehensive treatment program that includes detoxification, counseling, and therapy. The detox process is challenging, bringing about withdrawal symptoms such as fatigue, depression, and intense cravings for meth. However, under medical supervision, Jake safely navigates through this phase. Counseling and therapy sessions are also vital for Jake's recovery process. Through these sessions, he begins to understand the underlying factors that led to his addiction, such as coping with stress and emotional pain. He learns new coping mechanisms and strategies to deal with life's challenges without resorting to substance use. As part of his recovery, Jake also participates in group therapy and support groups. Meeting others going through similar experiences helps him realize he's not alone in his struggle. These group sessions provide a platform for sharing experiences and strategies for staying sober, fostering a sense of community and support. Nose candy? Snow? Blow? This powder is so ancient that scientists have found traces of it in millennia-old mummies. It even used to be a common ingredient in over-the-counter medicine. But now it's worth billions on the black market and is responsible for thousands of overdoses every year. It could only be cocaine. Cocaine is one of the most popular recreational drugs, but like with a lot of illegal substances, it can be hard to get straight answers about it. What effect does cocaine have on your body? Where does cocaine even come from? How does a cocaine high feel? And if you're addicted to cocaine, how can you get better? You've got the questions, we've got the answers, and we recommend you listen closely. You don't want to become another tragic statistic. Let's start off by answering the most important question: what is cocaine? At its most basic level, it's a type of naturally occurring chemical known as a tropane alkaloid. Derived from the leaves of the South American coca plant, once it's extracted from the plant, it's typically processed into a powdered form called cocaine hydrochloride. Cocaine is a nervous system stimulant, a class of substances that also includes MDMA, caffeine, nicotine, and prescription medications like Ritalin and Adderall. Like all stimulants, its main effect is that it gives the user an energy boost and stimulates the brain's reward pathway. This, as you might guess from the name, is one of the parts of the brain that produces dopamine, a chemical that the brain releases as a form of positive reinforcement. Normally, the reward pathway is activated by what the brain deems to be positive actions: exercise, eating your favorite foods, finishing a complex task, and listening to music, all things that cause your brain to produce dopamine. But cocaine sends the reward pathway into overdrive, resulting in intense excitement as well as an inflated sense of self-confidence. On the extreme end, a cocaine user might also experience psychotic delusions, and all that excess energy can cause heightened aggression. Other side effects of cocaine use include raised blood pressure, raised body temperature, and photosensitivity due to pupil dilation. The high doesn't go on for very long. On average, users start to come down after 15 minutes to a half hour. Even if the high is worn off, the drug isn't immediately flushed out of your system. Traces of cocaine can be picked up in blood and saliva samples for up to 2 days after use, and in urine samples for up to 4 days after. Cocaine use can even be detected by testing hair samples. Metabolized cocaine can be found in your hair for up to 3 months after taking it, which is just another reason to be suspicious of your boss if he asks for a hair sample. Before we get into some of the even more severe side effects of cocaine, some of which have had extremely devastating consequences for huge swaths of the American population, let's rewind the clock to see how this prolific drug made its way into modern hands in the first place. Cocaine has had a long history as a medical treatment, going all the way back to the indigenous people in the Andes Mountains in South America. Evidence recovered from mummies in the region suggests that cocaine has been used in the area since at least 1000 BC. The Wari and Inca people frequently used the coca leaf as a stimulant, painkiller, and as treatment for altitude sickness when climbing up and down the Andes Mountains. Coca leaves are still used in the same way to this day by the people who live in and around the Andes. Typically, the leaves are chewed or boiled in a kind of medicinal tea. It can also be used to treat mouth ulcers and toothaches by wrapping coca leaves around alkaline burnt ashes and placing the sachet inside your mouth. Coca leaves were also consumed to lessen the effects of cold and hunger, which are common problems for people living in remote, high-altitude locations. When the Spanish first invaded South America, they saw the locals using coca leaves and immediately knew they wanted some of those magic leaves for themselves. When Francisco Pizarro conquered the Inca people in 1532, the Spanish Empire began exploiting the coca plant, forcing the natives to farm it in mass quantities so it could be exported back to Europe. Cocaine really took off in the West in the 19th century after chemists figured out how to isolate cocaine from the plant itself. In this new powdered form, it became a very common ingredient in medicines to treat fatigue, depression, chronic pain, and even poor sexual performance. In a totally crazy move that really could have only happened during the 19th century, in 1863, a Corsican chemist named Angelo Mariani started selling a drug called Vin Mariani, a mix of cocaine and wine. And of course, cocaine was also an ingredient in Coca-Cola. Like a lot of soda fountain classics, Coke was originally sold as a patent medicine, a type of brand name over-the-counter drug that was very popular in the 19th century and had dubious health benefits. In the early 1900s, however, an FDA crackdown on quack medicine and a push for cleaner labeling on consumer products led to a lot of patent medicines disappearing from shelves. The ones that did survive did so by drastically changing their formulas and rebranding as soft drinks, including Coca-Cola, which was totally cocaine-free by 1929. Cocaine was phased out of a lot of medicines over the course of the 20th century, though its effectiveness as a numbing agent and a vasoconstrictant means it's still used as a topical anesthetic to this day. It's most common in nose, eye, and throat surgery, where the blood vessels are very delicate and need to be shrunk to avoid damage. In terms of recreational use, cocaine exploded in popularity in the 1970s and 80s when it became associated with the clubbing culture and gained a glamorous reputation for being the drug of choice for rich playboys and rock stars. Cocaine's pretty versatile as far as drugs go, and it can be taken in a number of ways. Most commonly, the powder is rubbed onto the gums or inhaled through the nose, but it can also be dissolved in water and taken via injection. Its freebase form, known colloquially as crack cocaine, we'll talk about crack again later, is also smoked. Cocaine usually isn't taken orally though. With a pKa of 8.6, cocaine is a weak base which interacts with the digestive acid in a way that makes it absorb poorly through the stomach. You can still get high from ingesting cocaine, but the effect is weaker and it takes longer to kick in. Conversely, absorption of cocaine through the gums or nostrils means the chemical crosses the blood-brain barrier faster than other methods. When taken this way, the cocaine high will hit within only a couple of minutes of taking the drug. The quick-fix nature of cocaine is one of the biggest drawbacks of taking it. It's addictive. Like we said earlier, the high only tends to last about 30 minutes and you begin developing a tolerance to the drug's effects from the very first dose. On top of this, as is the case with a lot of stimulants, the users experience an unpleasant mood and energy crash when its effects start wearing off. So in order to delay the come down, users might keep taking bumps to prolong the high, even though each bump will have less and less of a positive effect each time, meaning that more and more doses are required to reach the desired high. Given what cocaine does to your blood pressure, this can have extremely deadly consequences. Cocaine overdose can cause heart attacks or stroke, and habitual cocaine use can lead to all kinds of serious heart conditions, as well as the onset of stress-related disorders and psychosis. Coke bugs is a common delusion suffered by cocaine users going through psychotic episodes, where the sufferer believes that bugs are crawling under their skin. Most people who use cocaine only do so casually, in no small part because of how expensive the purer strains of cocaine can get. They might try it once or twice while at a party or a club, and may never do it again. But that doesn't mean they're totally off the hook, as even casual cocaine use has its negative effects. Snorting cocaine can cause damage to your nasal passages in the short term, a blocked or runny nose on the mild end, and nosebleeds on the more severe end. Remember when we said that cocaine will shrink the blood vessels when it's applied? Well, when you combine that with a rise in blood pressure, it means that more blood is trying to get through the veins that are becoming thinner and thinner, leading to blood vessels in the nose rupturing and leaving you with a bloody nose. The damage done by infrequent cocaine use can heal on its own, but habitual users can often suffer from a constantly runny nose, chronic nosebleeds, complete loss of their sense of smell, and a weakened immune system. In extreme cases, people who regularly snort cocaine can contract something called invasive fungal sinusitis, a nasty infection that causes parts of the nose to rot. Even if you don't catch invasive fungal sinusitis, cocaine abuse can still make part of your nose rot off. The powdered form of cocaine is cocaine hydrochloride. So when you absorb the cocaine, you're left with the hydrochloride. If too much hydrochloride builds up in your nose, it can form hydrochloric acid, which breaks down the cells in the nose over time. Ouch! Cocaine isn't very good for your teeth either. Much like taking it through your nose, taking it via your gums can leave you open to infections. Like all stimulants, it has a dehydrating effect and can lower the production of saliva, which leads to a loss of tooth enamel. Cocaine use can also cause involuntary tooth grinding, which can further damage your teeth and gums. Taking cocaine intravenously is probably the most dangerous way to take it, as on top of the risk of stroke, heart attack, and psychotic breakdowns, you also have to worry about fun things like embolism and needle contamination. Incidentally, Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective from the novels of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was a periodic user of injected cocaine. Goes without saying that this was a little more normalized during the Victorian era than it is now. Strangely enough, people who consume cocaine this way also often report getting tinnitus straight after injecting, which usually lasts for a couple of minutes. Those who inject cocaine are more likely to overdose, as the high wears off a lot faster than it does when taken through the nose or gums. Cocaine is also sometimes mixed with heroin to create something called a speedball, which is extremely dangerous as the complementary effects of the two drugs together make it hard to recognize symptoms of overdose. A lot of people have died as a result of a speedball overdose, including a number of celebrities such as John Belushi, River Phoenix, and Philip Seymour Hoffman. Combining cocaine and alcohol is also a pretty bad idea, since the chemicals combine and form a substance called cocaethylene in your liver. Cocaethylene produces a more euphoric high, but it increases your risk of developing heart problems significantly. The fact that cocaine is a social drug also means it's often associated with blood-borne illnesses like hepatitis C. People tend to do cocaine in groups, and when they snort lines with the same straw or inject it with the same needle, it greatly increases the likelihood of illnesses spreading from person to person. Now that we've covered the effects of cocaine, let's circle back to its freebase form, crack. Cocaine in its powdered form can't be smoked, as it burns too completely and too quickly. But in its solid or freebase form, it has a melting point of 98 degrees Celsius, which means it can be sublimated and inhaled as a vapor. Crack cocaine is made by boiling cocaine powder and water over a constant heat and mixing in some base, such as baking soda. The mixture then cools into a brittle crack rock that can be broken into smaller pieces and smoked using a pipe. Like any drug taken by smoking, crack can cause long-term damage to lungs, to the point that crack users cough up blood. Crack comes with its own unique side effects compared to, say, cigarettes or marijuana, due to the unique way it has to be smoked. Unlike weed or cigarettes, the vapor produced from melting a crack rock loses its potency very quickly. Crack pipes are typically very short to reduce the time it takes for the substance to travel from the pipe to the user's lungs as much as possible. And since crack pipes are normally made of glass, they tend to get very hot very quickly. Because of this, people who smoke crack will develop blisters on their lips and fingers from touching the hot glass too much. Crack became such a hot-button issue in American culture that in its heyday, bizarre public service announcements featuring a wide range of public figures, such as movie star Clint Eastwood and children's entertainment character Pee Wee Herman, were televised across the U.S., hoping to discourage people from taking the drug. During the moral panic around crack cocaine in the 1980s and 90s, when the drug became popular in low-income neighborhoods across America, concerns were raised about the health of children born to parents who smoked crack. The term crack baby arose as part of that moral panic, and many anti-drug groups argued that crack usage in pregnant people would lead to a generation of children with poor health, low intelligence, and underdeveloped social skills. This turned out to be a greatly exaggerated fear based mainly on racism and classism. Studies done since have shown that compared to the effects of nicotine and alcohol use during pregnancy, the effects of cocaine on fetal development were negligible. However, cocaine abuse during pregnancy can cause a miscarriage and can in some cases trigger premature labor. Crack is also cheaper than powdered cocaine, which means it's more likely to be cut with other drugs and potentially poisonous substances. This is not to say that powdered cocaine is never cut with any hidden nasties though. Cheap cocaine is often cut with baking soda, quinine, or sugar, which can cause blockages in blood vessels when injected or respiratory infections when inhaled. It can also be cut with a drug called levamisole, which heightens the drug's effects but has been associated with the development of autoimmune disease. Cocaine's also increasingly being contaminated with fentanyl, an extremely potent synthetic opioid. While many have speculated that drug manufacturers combine the two drugs intentionally, tests done on seized cocaine by police suggest that fentanyl is usually only present in trace elements. Fentanyl has become a very popular drug in the past decade, and it's likely that cross-contamination occurs simply as a result of the two drugs being processed in the same lab or from them being stored in the same places. But because of how potent fentanyl is, consuming drugs with even trace elements of it can have noticeable negative consequences. Like a speedball, the mix of fentanyl and cocaine can have deadly effects if the signs of overdose aren't spotted quickly. Given that cocaine addiction can lead to all of these horrible effects, it might give you some comfort to know that the physical effects of cocaine withdrawal are fairly minor. Cocaine withdrawal can cause disturbed sleep schedules, increased appetite, slower reaction time, and fatigue. These physical symptoms usually start to go away a few days after quitting. However, the psychological effects can be much more severe. Cocaine withdrawal can often cause severe depression and anxiety, as the brain's reward pathway needs time to repair itself from overstimulation. Therapy can help to alleviate these psychological symptoms, but the process of recovery can take years. And during that time, the person may feel compelled to relapse and start taking cocaine again. That's why it's important for people trying to quit cocaine to have a social support network, and why group therapy is so important in cocaine addiction rehab. because while many have survived and moved on from cocaine use, it only takes one unlucky session for things to take a turn for the worst. Heroin was first manufactured in 1898 by the Bayer Pharmaceutical Company of Germany and marketed as a treatment for tuberculosis, as well as a remedy for morphine addiction. Made from the resin of poppy flowers, other chemicals are added and it's then filtered and refined to become the street drug known as heroin. The average cost of a single dose of 0.1 grams of heroin is approximately $15 to $20 in the US, costing between $150 and $200 per day for an addict to support their habit. In this episode of the Infographics Show, we'll be exploring just how bad the drug is as we find out, what does heroin do to your body? Before we answer that question, let's first look at how the drug is taken and how many heroin users exist in the US. Heroin is an opioid derivative, and an estimated 13.5 million people in the world take opioids, of which 9.2 million are heroin users. According to the National Drug Survey on Drug Use and Health in 2016, about 948,000 Americans reported using heroin in that year, with the greatest increases being in young adults aged 18 to 25. The number of people using heroin for the first time in 2016 was 170,000, which is nearly double the number of people from 10 years previous. British newspaper The Guardian reported that in 2017, according to a study based on a survey of almost 80,000 people, heroin use among American adults has increased almost five-fold in the last decade. Researchers found that just after the year 2000, 0.33% of adults reported having used heroin at some point in their life. 10 years later, it had risen to 1.6%, which equates to about 3.8 million Americans. There are more people in the US using heroin. There are more people that meet criteria for heroin addiction, and we are seeing increases in all different social strata, in different age groups, in both sexes, said Sylvia Martins, lead author of the research from Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. And these figures may even be low, as it's likely that many heroin users simply don't take part in health surveys. When we think of heroin, we think needles, but heroin can be smoked, which is known as chasing the dragon, and depending on the purity of the drug and the preference of the user, it can also be snorted. If injected, heroin can be administered into a vein or muscle. Heroin addicts tend to inject the drug into a vein as the effects take hold faster. Shortly after taking heroin, users report that they can feel a rush of euphoria, dry mouth, and a warm flushing of the skin. There is relief from pain and anxiety. Arms and legs often feel unnaturally heavy. The body temperature increases, the mouth becomes parched, and people often feel nauseous and vomit. The heart rate slows or is irregular. Breathing will also slow down and a person goes into a dreamlike state, falling in and out of consciousness. All of these effects relate to taking a small amount of heroin. Depending on the tolerance level of the user, an addict will have a much higher tolerance and need more of the drug to feel the same effect. But effects on your body can ultimately be what leads to a deadly overdose. If too much heroin is taken, it can cause a person's brain to not receive enough blood, and the respiratory system can go from slow breathing to complete shutdown. What about the longer-term effects of taking heroin on a regular basis? Unfortunately, the news is not good. You can develop infections of the heart lining and valves, usually as a result of lack of sterile injection techniques. Approximately 70% to 80% of new hepatitis C infections in the US each year are the result of injection drug use. Kidney disease is prevalent among long-term users. Pulmonary complications, which are often infection-related, skin infections and abscesses are common. Oral health problems, including damaged teeth and swelling of the gums, skin problems from scratching, and problems with sexual functioning. Heroin impacts your body and health in a myriad of negative ways in the long term. There's also the potential for permanent organ damage to the liver and kidneys, and brain damage from a lack of oxygen that occurs during overdoses. And chronic heroin users often have lung problems, including tuberculosis and pneumonia. One of the biggest issues with heroin is that it is highly addictive. Physical addiction to heroin means it's very tough to stop taking the drug as the body changes, putting the user through traumatic mental and physical side effects. A user who's been on the drug for some time will have a very high tolerance, making the withdrawal even trickier. When people are addicted to heroin and they try to stop using, they can experience extreme withdrawal symptoms from between 48 and 72 hours to even longer after stopping use. The symptoms can include extreme craving for the drug, restlessness, muscle and bone pain, and vomiting. It takes many adults several attempts to get off the drug, and many never do. Addiction recovery rates for popular 12-step groups such as Alcoholics Anonymous or AA may be as low as 5 to 10% according to Dr. Lance Dodds, the author of The Sober Truth, debunking the bad science behind 12-step programs and the rehab industry. So other than going cold turkey, which means to stop and withdraw suddenly and completely from the drug, often without support or checking into a rehab clinic, what other ways are there? In recent years, there's been a lot of research into alternative methods. We found an interesting article in the British newspaper The Guardian about a chap named Jay. Jay was smoking cigarettes and marijuana at the age of 12, snorting cocaine by 16, and by the time he turned 18, he was onto heroin and crack cocaine. Amazingly, he still went through university and managed to land a job as a banker in the City of London. But it didn't last long, with Jay's marriage, health, and life in general breaking down as he continued to take drugs. By that point, Jay was mostly taking heroin, following an unrelated stomach operation that left him addicted to painkillers before he got back onto heroin after the doctor stopped the prescription. Jay took the rehab route and checked into a $13,000 a week center in Thailand in 2016. He was clean for a while, but like many addicts, Jay relapsed. Then a friend told him about ibogaine, a drug from an obscure African plant that Jay's friend said would enable him to come off heroin without the lengthy, painful withdrawal and stay off. His friend said the drug would help Jay understand where his addictive behavior was coming from. It would invoke a spiritual experience, as if speaking to God. After a lot of online research and speaking to different doctors overseas, Jay eventually flew to South Africa to try the treatment. One Monday morning, he took a test dose of ibogaine. He swallowed a small capsule with a glass of water. An hour later, Jay felt like his withdrawals had disappeared. The next 12 to 18 hours were a blur, though he remembered one vivid dream. I could see a lady, almost like Mother Mary, shaking a finger at me. She was offering to take me to wherever she was going, and I was saying no, no, no. Jay flew back home, and in the 10 months since, he hasn't had a single relapse. He explained to the Guardian newspaper that he had developed a new sense of confidence, has a new job and girlfriend, and finally feels like a functioning member of society. With all the pain and uncertainty that surrounds heroin withdrawal, ibogaine sounds like a miracle cure. But there's a catch. At this stage, ibogaine is illegal in the US, France, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, Poland, Croatia, and Switzerland, and is strongly restricted in the UK under the 2016 Psychoactive Substances Act. And Jay also experienced some possible side effects. Once he was back in England, he was rushed into the hospital and diagnosed with a congenital heart problem, something he said could have been exacerbated by taking ibogaine. In September last year, at an ibogaine conference in Vienna, 20 experts, including medical professionals, providers, or activists, gathered to increase awareness of the drug and to encourage more research in Europe. Whatever the answer, it's clear that heroin and other opioids are a big problem, and the epidemic is growing. In the US alone, deaths from opioids have been rising sharply for years, and drug overdoses already kill more Americans under the age of 50 than anything else. And nearly 500,000 people across America could die from opioids over the next decade. I want to see good financial returns, but also to me, there's the extra psychic return of having my creativity and technological vision bear fruit and change the world in a positive way. Jeff Bezos once said, "While some may question if he's made the world a better place, we can certainly say he's made some good financial returns." He is the richest man in the world, and it's reported that he was worth $143,810,231,459.23 at 3:55 p.m. on February 26, 2019. This number will of course fluctuate, and it's said his divorce will take a considerable chunk out of his fortune. Before we talk about how he made his billions, let's first try to get it into our heads just how much cash this man has. As we said, his worth changes a lot, and that's due to many factors, but let's just say for now he has around $140 billion. According to the International Monetary Fund in 2018, that would give him a nominal gross national product, GDP, around the size of Kuwait, which comes around 58th on the list of GDPs around the world when that list was created. As one media outlet stated in 2018, Jeff Bezos is now richer than Iceland, Tanzania, Jamaica, and Estonia combined. What does this translate to? Someone already did the math for us in 2018 regarding his yearly earnings broken down into smaller time frames. We're told that it's estimated that he makes almost $1.5 billion a week, around $213 million a day, $8.9 million an hour, $149,000 plus dollars every minute, and $2.4 thousand per every second that goes by. Yep. For every minute he lies in bed, watches reruns of The Apprentice, picks his nose, or carves a pineapple, he's earning as much as a very well-paid employee in the United States earns in a year. In an hour, he's rich, and in a day, he's taken in more than most people in the entire world could only wish for. If you're watching this from Malawi, where the World Bank states the gross national income per year is on average $320, you might be trying to get your head around how much time it takes Mr. Bezos to earn your yearly wage. The answer, in short, is not very long at all. Maybe about the time it takes to blink if you do it fast. You get the picture. This man is mind-bogglingly rich. Imagining his wealth is like trying to fathom just how many planets and stars there are moving about in the cosmos. Let's just say he is cosmically rich, astronomically wealthy, and it's universally accepted that no one knows how to create a cash stack like Jeff. But how did he do that? Well, we first have to look at young Jeff, the millionaire in the making, the billionaire in the beginning. Bezos was born on January 12, 1964. That makes him a Capricorn. And if you believe in that kind of thing, you'll know this star sign is supposed to be ambitious, proud, and goal-oriented. He took his first breaths in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but was raised in Houston, Texas. He wasn't from some rich family, and when he came screaming into this world, his mom was a 17-year-old high school student, and his pop owned a bike shop. These two got married, and they became the Jorgensen family. But that didn't last long, and when Jeff was 4, his mother married a Cuban man named Miguel Bezos, sometimes called Mike. If you're wondering what happened to Jeff's birth father, in 2013, USA Today said Ted Jorgensen had just found out who his son was and wanted to reconnect. I didn't know where he was, if he had a good job or not, or if he were alive or dead, he was quoted as saying. So we have a young Jeff and his mother and her new husband. They were still not well off, but Mike got himself a degree and ended up working as an engineer. It's said even at a young age, curious Jeff was interested in how things worked in his home, and at times he was able to rig contraptions of his own around the house. He graduated from messing with his family's appliances and moved on to more scientific work in high school, where he graduated as valedictorian. It was there he started his first enterprise, an educational summer camp called the Dream Institute. At this time, he was also fascinated with computers. In 1986, he left Princeton University with a 4.2 grade point average, and he was a whiz at computer science, as well as being a young man that was seen as exceptional in many areas. You can't really go wrong after that, and he soon was offered jobs at lots of big firms, but he settled with a position at FinTech. Soon after, he worked for the investment firm D.E. Shaw, and that's where he met his wife-to-be, the novelist Mackenzie Tuttle. This is not a family show, but a money show, although we'll tell you that he had 3 sons with her and they also adopted a girl from China. That likely went very well for a while, but after some time being separated, his wife did what she did best and penned a letter. This was a Twitter post that announced her and Jeff were splitting up. We certainly aren't going to go into the controversial things that happened after that, but suffice to say, they had some marital problems. If she gets her 50% of his wealth, she will become the richest woman in the world. Okay, back to the cold hard cash question. In 1993, Bezos started an online bookstore. A year later, he founded a company some of you might know called Amazon. This wasn't his first choice of name, but he settled with Amazon because the jungle was massive and exotic, and that's what his company would be. The Amazon jungle is packed with an incredible array of flora and fauna, and his company would become packed with an incredible number of things. He had to borrow some cash to get this started, and while it only sold books in the beginning, he always said later Amazon would branch out into many products. But books were successful alone, and in a month his company was selling them to people in 45 countries, bringing in $20,000 a week for the startup. A few years later, and with millions raised for his now public company, he started to include music and many other consumer products. At the time, many other .com businesses were failing or sunk, but not Amazon. It said yearly sales in 1995 were around $510,000, but in 2011, a cool $17 billion. But rewinding a little, we must remember remember that Bezos started to put his long fingers in many other pies. In 2002, he launched the cloud computing platform Amazon Web Services, something which would end up being very useful not just for companies or individuals but for governments. Amazon also came out with the Amazon Kindle in 2007. Another area he went into was publishing, and in 2013, he bought the Washington Post company. What else did he do? Well, a lot, really. Amazon has an AI arm, which, if you follow tech news, has done things like develop facial recognition technology. The company that became the world's biggest shipping firm has come up with novel ways to deliver packages, such as by drone, and has implemented new technologies into its warehouses. Then there's the video-on-demand service Amazon Prime, and original content producer Amazon Studios, and also Amazon Publishing. You also have cashless Amazon Go stores and the $13.4 billion acquisition of the Whole Foods Market, a specialist supermarket. In terms of revenue, Amazon was said to be the biggest tech company in the world in 2018, with a revenue of $232 billion. It's also said to be worth in the region of $800 billion, but Apple beats Amazon for first place in that category at a value of around $930 billion. Amazon also employs quite a few people, with 613,300 folks working for the company around the world. The question now is, how does all this success relate to cash going into Mr. Bezos' rather large pockets? Well, as you can guess, the main part of the business is the website Amazon.com. You know that because you've likely bought something there. We mean, who hasn't over the age of 18? The fact is, most people are using the site means Jeff Bezos is a very rich man. Bloomberg, that reports Bezos' wealth to have risen as high as $161 billion in 2018, tells us that he owns 16% of the company Amazon. You already know how much the company is worth and how much that company pulls in, so that 16% he owns is where the lion's share of this money comes from. Bloomberg also says he has sold some of his shares in Amazon to fund his space exploration company Blue Origin. But basically, when you consider that Bezos owns 78.8 million shares of Amazon, and each Amazon share is worth $1,636.46 at the time of writing, well, you can see why he's so rich. If you're wondering how Amazon.com makes money, well, it's mainly from general retail and the money people pay to sell stuff there, either as individuals or professional retail third-party sellers, but also from shipping fees, warehouse fees, deals, and more. The chunk of cash comes from retail and a bit more from third-party sellers on Amazon.com, but as we said, Amazon Web Services has also done well, and according to Forbes, it saw a revenue of around $25 billion for 2018. Amazon Prime brings in around another $6 billion, and a few more billions are made from ads and things such as co-branded credit card agreements. If you're wondering what sells best on Amazon, books are only in third place now, with household items coming in first place and toys and games in second place. Finally, we might also look at this opening paragraph from a Fortune article written in 2019. Those wondering how many zeros Amazon, which is valued at nearly $800 billion, has to pay in federal taxes, might be surprised to learn that its check to the IRS will read exactly $0. We're told this is perfectly legal. We'll let one expert explain it, albeit vaguely. He said, Amazon avoids paying federal taxes using a variety of tax credits and tax exemptions that are legal and built into the U.S. federal tax code. What he meant by these exemptions was mostly centered around a research and development tax credit, recent tax deductions for investments in equipment, and also something called stock-based compensation. So there you go. That's how Jeff Bezos became the richest man in the universe. You don't have to be the richest man in the world to have amazing cybersecurity like Amazon has. Dashlane is your one and only tool that you need to keep your digital information and logins safe from hackers and malware. That's why we love using it. Dashlane offers breach alerts to let you know when your accounts have been compromised, and an easy-to-use VPN to keep you safe while browsing. And their password storage feature lets you quickly sign in and out of any account on any device securely. With so many threats out there to the average person, Dashlane is the one and only tool you need to keep you and your digital information safe today. Head on over to www.dashlane.com/infographics for a free 30-day trial. And if you use the coupon code INFOGRAPHICS, you can get 10% off a premium subscription today. What do you think about one man having all this cash? What do you think about Amazon? Also, be sure to check out our other video, How This Man Made $85 Billion. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.